Good morning. It's 9 o'clock and we have a very full agenda today, so I want to get started right away. My name is Samantha James Perez. I'm the president of the Board of Vocational Nursing and Psychiatric Technicians. This meeting is being held on Wednesday, February 8th, 2017 at the Doubletree Hotel, San Diego, 1646 Front Street, San Diego, California. I would like to call this meeting to order. For the record, we will need board members to introduce themselves. Let's start on my far left, Mr. Deerking.
John Deerking, public member.
Donna Norton, LVN member.
John Vertito, nursing educator.
Good morning, Andrew Moreno, Board Vice President, public member.
Hi again, my name is Samantha James Perez, and I am the Psychiatric Technician member and board president.
Tammy Ndozo, LVN member.
Good morning, Bernice Basta Martinez, public member.
Todd DeBronstein, Psychiatric Technician member.
Eric Ma, public member.
Thank you, and let the record show that we do have quorum. That leads us to agenda item number 4, the Pledge of Allegiance. At this time, I would like to ask my fellow board member and veteran, John Vertito, to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. That leads us to agenda item number 5, report and discussion of Administrative and Enforcement Monitor Phase 3 results. Mr. Ben Frank is here with us today. Mr. Frank, would you like to, as you present your report, would you like board members to reserve questions until the end, or would you like them to give you throughout the presentation?
Yes, if they could hold their questions till the end, that would be appreciated.
Okay.
The presentation will only take maybe 25 to 30 minutes.
Great. So we'll listen to your full presentation, and then board members can submit questions.
Thank you.
Okay, great. And whenever you're ready, Mr. Frank.
Thank you. Good morning, members of the Board of Vocational Nursing and Psychiatric Technicians. Thank you for inviting me to present a summary of my updated assessments of the board's enforcement program and targeted administrative processes. I anticipate that, as I mentioned, the presentation will take less than 30 minutes to complete. As with my prior presentations, I begin with a brief summary of the background leading up to the appointment of an administrative and enforcement program monitor for the board. Additionally, I will provide you with updated information regarding the recent performance and current status of the enforcement program. I will also summarize results of additional assessments completed of targeted administrative processes. The presentation includes a brief summary of the status of the board's implementation of the recommendations provided in the second report and concludes with a summary of various issues that surfaced or were brought to our attention during the past 6 months, but were not assessed because they were outside of the scope of the monitor assignment. I'll take your questions after completing the presentation. Project background. The board's enforcement program was thrown into disarray by the organizational and workflow changes that were implemented during 2011-12 and 2012-13. These changes included establishing a new non-sworn investigation section and assigning all licensee complaint cases to the new section, including cases involving serious criminal misconduct and significant patient harm that were previously referred to the Department of Consumer Affairs Division of Investigation. The problems resulting from these changes became apparent to the Department of Consumer Affairs, which made efforts to encourage this board to utilize the new Consumer Protection Enforcement Initiative, case prioritization guidelines, and the Division's Investigation Services. Members of this board also began developing awareness of these same problems from reviewing discipline package that in many cases were quite old and recognizing that the licensees were continuing to practice for years without discipline. Additionally, some members were dissatisfied with management's responsiveness to their requests for additional information. During September 2014, this board appointed an enforcement task force to assess the board's enforcement and discipline processes. In November 2014, the task force submitted its report to the board. The task force report included 6 recommendations, including a recommendation that the board begin utilizing the CPEI case prioritization guidelines and resume utilizing the Division of Investigation Services. This board approved this recommendation along with most of the task force's other recommendations. However, board staff continued to assign nearly all licensee complaint cases to its own investigation section. Concurrently, reports surfaced during the board's 2014-15 sunset review about the board's organizational and operational problems, and the scope and magnitude of these problems became apparent to the legislature. Following the separation of the executive officer, assistant executive officer, and chief of enforcement, Division of Investigation staff provided assistance to the board with management of the enforcement program and began reviewing all of the board's pending investigation to identify cases for immediate reassignment to the Division of Investigation. DCA also provided the board with an acting executive officer. A new chief of enforcement was appointed, along with new supervisors for the complaint and investigation sections. Subsequently, Assembly Bill 179 was enacted requiring the Department of Consumer Affairs to appoint a monitor to assess this board's enforcement program and specified administrative processes. On February 29, DCA awarded the contract to Benjamin Frank LLC to provide the monitor services. We completed an initial assessment of the board's enforcement program during March and April. The initial report documenting results of the initial assessment was presented to this board on June 20th and submitted to the legislature on July 1st. Additional interviews, research, and analyses were completed during June, July, and August. The second report documenting results of these efforts was presented to this board on October 20th and submitted to the legislature on November 1st. I also attended the board's November 4th meeting to answer additional questions that the members had, and subsequently we prepared and submitted an addendum to the second report summarizing results of the board member survey that had been conducted during Phase 1. An updated assessment of the status of the enforcement program was completed during November and December. We also completed targeted assessments in several other areas. The third report, which is required to be submitted to the legislature this upcoming Monday, the 13th, documents results of these efforts. The board's 2015-16 enforcement program turnaround. Corrective measures taken during 2015-16 contained the problems that accumulated in prior years and set into place a foundation for building a sustainable, effective, and efficient enforcement program. Improvements made during 2015-16 included a complete restructuring of the license applicant arrest conviction report process, a restructuring of the case intake and screening process, significant increases in the number of completed licensee arrest conviction report and licensee complaint investigations, significant reductions in the number of pending investigations and in the average age of the pending investigations, significant increases in the number of cases referred to the Attorney General and the number of discipline cases completed, significant reductions in the number of pending discipline cases and the average age of the pending discipline cases, and significant reductions in the average elapsed time to file pleadings and complete disciplinary actions. However, during July to October 2016, it appears that the board's enforcement program turnaround stalled. Current status of the board's enforcement program. As shown by the bar chart on slide 7, the restructuring of the license applicant arrest conviction report process during 2015-16 reduced the number of cases referred to enforcement by about 3,000 cases per year, with comparable reductions in the number of completed investigations. Fewer than 800 license applicant cases per year are now referred to enforcement. Nearly all of these cases are now handled as desk investigations, and more than 80% of these cases are reviewed and quickly closed with issuance of a license to the applicant along with a notice of warning. During July to October 2016, these investigations were completed in an average of less than 2 months, compared to an average of about 18 months during 2014-15. As shown by the bar chart on slide 8, during 2014-15, primarily during the last several months of the year following the board's sunset review, about 130 enforcement cases were reassigned to the Department of Consumer Affairs Division of Investigation. Subsequently, during 2015-16, about 370 enforcement cases were referred to the Division of Investigation, including both reassigned cases that had languished in the investigation section and newly received cases involving serious criminal misconduct and significant patient harm. The board now assigns about 180 to 200 enforcement cases per year to the Division of Investigation. As shown by the bar chart on slide 9, during 2015-16, significantly more licensee arrest conviction report and complaint investigations were completed than were completed during 2014-15. In comparison, on an annualized basis from July to October 2016, significantly fewer licensee arrest conviction report and complaint investigations were completed than were completed during the previous fiscal year. As shown by the bar chart on slide 10, during 2015-16, there were significant reductions in the number of pending license applicant, licensee arrest conviction report, and licensee complaint investigations. But subsequently, from July to October 2016, there was very little change in the number of pending investigations. Concurrently, the average age of the board's pending licensee complaint cases decreased from about 17 months as of June 30th, 2015-16 to about 12 months as of October 31, 2016. However, the 12-month average age of the board's pending licensee complaint cases is still quite old. As shown by the bar chart on slide 11, the average elapsed time to complete licensee arrest conviction report investigations decreased during 2015-16 as compared to the prior year. Subsequently, during July to October 2016, there was very little change to the average elapsed time to complete these investigations. Due to the completion of especially large numbers of older cases during 2015-16, the average elapsed time to complete licensee complaint investigations increased significantly during that year. During July to October 2016, the average elapsed time to complete licensee complaint investigations decreased to about 22 months. But that amount of elapsed time for completing these investigations is still very long. During our on-site interviews with board staff on December 7th and 8th, we were surprised to learn that a large-scale audit of licensee compliance with the board's continuing education requirements had been launched. According to staff, in late November, the board began mass mailing CE compliance audit letters to about 58,000 licensees, representing more than 40% of all of the board's licensees. We were told that the mailings were expected to be completed by mid-December. None of the managers or staff that we interviewed were able to articulate specific plans or schedules for staffing or completing all of these audits. We later learned that board staff contacted the Department of Consumer Affairs Business Services Office on December 9th about folding, stuffing, and mailing 50,000 of the CE audit letters. We also learned that the Business Services Office assisted the board during November and December with submitting and expediting a request to the Department of General Services Office of State Printing to print window envelopes needed for the mailing. In early January, after receiving the envelopes from the Office of State Printing, the Business Services Office completed the board's CE mailing project. Even if very little time is needed by board staff for each of these audits, like let's just say 15 minutes for each case, a relatively large workforce could be needed for an extended period of time to actually complete all of those audits. In mid-January, the board began offering weekday and weekend overtime to all staff to help respond to the increased volumes of CE-related mail and email that were being received. As shown by the bar chart on slide 13, during 2015-16, the number of cases referred to the Attorney General and the number of discipline cases completed both increased significantly compared to 2014-15. In comparison, on an annualized basis from July to October 2016, the number of discipline cases referred to the AG increased, while the number of discipline cases completed decreased. As shown by the bar chart on slide 14, during 2015-16, the number of pending discipline cases decreased significantly, along with the average age of the pending discipline cases. Subsequently, during July to October, there was very little change in either the number of pending discipline cases or the average age of the pending discipline cases. The total number of pending discipline cases is still very large, and many of these cases are quite old. As shown by the bar chart on slide 15, during 2015-16, the average elapsed time to file pleadings and the total time to complete disciplinary actions decreased. Both of these measures decreased further during July to October 2016. These latter decreases partially reflect the lagged impacts of the large number of discipline cases completed during 2015-16 and related reductions in the number and age of the board's pending discipline cases. During 2015-16, the average elapsed time from case receipt to completion of the discipline process decreased to about 2.5 years, from about 3 years for cases completed during 2014-15. Subsequently, for the July to October period, this key elapsed time performance measure was unchanged. The board's 2.5-year-long average time frame to complete its discipline cases remains very long. Vacant positions and hiring. During periods immediately prior to its 2014-15 sunset review, the board experienced especially high vacancy rates, particularly within its education, licensing, and administration business units, where vacancy rates regularly exceeded 25%. In contrast, vacancy rates within the enforcement division were relatively low. Subsequently, many of the board's vacant positions were filled, which reduced vacancies to 8.5 positions by December 2015. As of December 2015, the board's overall vacancy rate was about 13%. Subsequently, during 2016, staff turnover increased. As of December 2016, the overall vacancy rate rose to about 17%, including 6 vacant enforcement division positions and 6 vacant positions within other business units. Some of these positions have been vacant for extended periods of time, including the existing assistant executive officer position, which has now, as we sit here today, been vacant for almost 2 full years. 4 positions within the licensing and administration division, which have been vacant for 6 months to as long as 19 months, and even longer if you update for February, and 2 positions within the Enforcement Division, the Supervising Special Investigator and Staff Services Analyst. Additionally, turnover of existing staff is continuing across the organization. During January, 3 additional staff separated from the board, bringing the board's overall vacancy rate above 20%, which is 1 of every 5 positions. Elevated numbers of Enforcement Division positions, the extended absence of the board's Chief of Enforcement, and turnover of experienced staff appear to be adversely impacting overall Enforcement Division performance, or Enforcement Program performance. Additionally, based on interviews conducted during early December with about 2/3 of Enforcement Division staff, the overall work environment and workforce morale appear to have deteriorated since March 2016, at least within the Enforcement Division. In our initial report, we noted that the board's Licensing and Administration Division had only 2 authorized management and supervisory positions, both of which were filled. We also noted that these 2 positions had large spans of control. Establishing and filling an additional Staff Services Manager 1 position for the new Licensing Support Services Business Unit and reclassifying and filling the Assistant Executive Officer position, or filling the existing Assistant Executive Officer position and utilizing it primarily to bolster management of licensing and administration business units would help to reduce those spans of control and improve oversight and management of subordinate staff. However, to date, neither of those positions has been filled on a permanent basis. Since mid-September 2016, the board has also made 4 temporary out-of-class assignments involving positions allocated to the Executive Office, Education, and Licensing and Administration business units. In my experience, I've never seen that kind of level of utilization of out-of-class assignments. Collectively, these assignments boosted the total number of positions involved in managing and supervising staff assigned to these business units by 1 position, but just for a limited period of time. And the utilization of short-term out-of-class assignments to temporarily fill vacant supervisory and management positions is simply not a substitute for filling the positions on a permanent basis. While we're on this subject of vacant positions and hiring, it should be evident to you that the management structure of this board has decayed. If you look at the organization chart in the report on page 3-2, it's Exhibit 3-1, you'll see that excluding the executive officer, there are 10 authorized or proposed management positions. Currently, 4 of those positions are vacant. 2 of the positions were newly established, which is beneficial, but it sets up an organizational structure where you have business units with a vacant supervisory or management position. As a general rule, except in the case of the smallest boards and bureaus, and I've seen some, like Board of Optometry, I recall, had only a handful of positions. You can't, when you only have a handful of positions, necessarily have good, adequate, organizational separation between enforcement and other programs and support services, or between executive staff and line operating staff. But for larger boards and bureaus, as a general rule, it is beneficial to have good organizational separation between the enforcement program and other programs, licensing, education, and support services, and also to have good separation between executive office staff and line operating staff. In the case of this board, with this current organizational structure and the vacant supervisory and management positions that exist, those separations both programmatically and organizationally, have decayed. And so the assistant executive officer, acting assistant executive officer, who's actually the supervising nurse education consultant, is also directly supervising discipline section staff, directly supervising licensing and support section staff, filling in for the chief of enforcement, and so on. So this is not a progressive improvement from where we were 6 months or a year ago. Staff training. During the past year, the board has significantly boosted the number of staff that are provided with various types of training and the amount of training that is provided to these staff. During both 2014 and 15, only about 60 training sessions were attended by only about 30 board staff. In comparison, during the first 9 months of 2016, about 140 training sessions were attended by more than 40 board staff. Additionally, much greater emphasis has been placed on providing more advanced training in such areas as analytical skills development and supervision, management, and leadership development. Oversight of staff and evaluation of staff performance. Recently, the level of oversight of Enforcement Division staff was adversely impacted by the separation of the sole supervisor of the investigation section and an extended leave of absence of the division's chief of enforcement. With respect to the licensing and administration business units, as I alluded to earlier, various changes in the organizational structure, position allocations, and staff assignments were initiated to improve workload and workforce oversight and management. However, these changes haven't really been implemented. Needs exist for the board to fill currently vacant management positions and avoid continuing needs to temporarily assign supervisors and managers to these positions. Finally, it is our understanding that annual reviews and evaluations of staff performance in all the board's business units have been initiated. During periods immediately prior to 2016, these reviews and evaluations were not usually completed except for new staff during their probationary period. Oversight of the board's executive officer. It is evident that the members of this governing board have been largely dependent on information provided by the executive officer for purposes of performing their oversight responsibilities. Although such dependency is not unique to this board, several members noted during our interviews with them that this dependency can result in the board being unaware of performance or other problems as occurred during periods preceding the board's 2014-15 sunset review. Oversight of the board's executive officer and by extension the board's programs and operations could potentially benefit from utilization of a 360-degree multi-rater assessment process in which feedback regarding the executive officer's performance is solicited from a variety of points of view. Such information could be utilized exclusively for developmental purposes or for a combination of developmental and performance assessment purposes. The third report contains just one recommendation, which involves establishing a multi-agency work group to assess the need for development of a 360-degree executive officer feedback process, and, if needed, the best approach and time frame for developing and implementing the process. Implementation of Phase 2 recommendations. In our second report, we presented 29 recommendations for improvement for consideration by the board. As of late December, the board had implemented 4 of these recommendations, involving continued utilization of temporary help to augment probation unit staffing, continued provision of training to Enforcement Division staff, development and adoption of a charter for the Enforcement Committee, and provision of briefings to the Enforcement Committee. As of late December, the board had also partially implemented 8 other recommendations, including 3 recommendations for improvement involving the board's case intake and screening procedures and practices, 2 recommendations involving working collaboratively with the Attorney General to identifying ways to increase utilization of and expand the Fast Track program, a recommendation involving development of legislation to enable delegation of default decision approvals to the executive officer, establishing a new probation section, and provision of training to board members. Other issues. During the past 6 months, various issues, problems, and concerns surfaced or were brought to our attention by board staff involving matters that were not within the scope of the monitor assignment. As these matters surfaced, and consistent with the provisions of AB 179, we relayed the information to the Department of Consumer Affairs project manager and, as appropriate, other members of DCA's leadership team. More specifically, information regarding various problems involving the board's licensing and licensing support business processes surfaced or were brought to our attention by board staff. While we have not completed any assessment of these problems, we did make some very limited efforts to confirm or verify the information provided to us. Specific problems that were brought to our attention subsequent to the completion of Phase 1 included delays in cashiering school applications, delays in processing online initial license applications, delays in processing license renewal batch mail received from the Department of Consumer Affairs Central Cashiering Unit, delays in processing address changes, and issuance of a temporary license to an applicant that was previously twice denied licensure for a criminal offense. In concluding, I would like to acknowledge and express my appreciation for all of the assistance provided to us during this 3rd phase of the project by the Department of Consumer Affairs Project Manager Brian Clifford and other DCA executives and staff, including staff within the department's Office of Information Services, Office of Human Resources, and Division of Investigation. Additionally, I'd like to thank the Office of the Attorney General for its responsiveness to our request for information and assistance, and also the representatives of the Business, Consumer Services, and Housing Agency who attended our Phase 3 interviews with board staff as observers. Finally, I'm especially grateful and appreciative of all of the special efforts made by many Enforcement Division staff and others at the board to provide us with the information and assistance needed to enable us to complete this updated assessment. Without their support, completion of this phase of the project would clearly have been substantially more difficult. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Frank. I do have a couple questions about the data. I'm hoping you can help me interpret one of your charts here. On page 8, current status of BVNPT's enforcement program, it's talking about the number of enforcement cases referred to the Division of Investigation. And you're correct, in 13-14, there were none. Then there started becoming more. 2015-16, it picked up, and now it's sort of decreased again. But when I see this information, my first thought, and I don't know if you would agree with this or you have any information about this, is that we had such a backlog that this 2015-16, July to December, was almost playing catch-up. So we sent a lot over. We pulled a lot, out of the cupboard, so to speak, and sent them over. And now we're plateauing to where we would normally be, which is about 180 to 200.
Yes,
that
that's
make
exactly
sense?
what I'm saying.
Okay.
The 130 were pretty much all backlog cases.
Gotcha.
And that's why I said those cases were reassigned to the Division of Investigation. And then the 370 cases is the 273 plus the 98, and that's a mix of both well over 100 cases, I recall, that had, again, languished in the investigation section and were, if you will, backlogged, that were reassigned to the Division of Investigation. Plus, they implemented intake and screening processes and were referring incoming cases directly to the Division of Investigation. So that 300 cases during 2015-16 is a mix.
Okay.
And that's why I look at, but during the January to June 2015-16, that is mostly incoming cases.
Okay.
And that's why I'm saying between the second half of 2015-16 and the first 4 months of 16-17, the steady state is about 180 to 200 cases, incoming cases being referred to the Division of Investigation. Those are no longer backlog cases being reassigned.
So that decrease was expected because we
That-
had to get through our backlog.
Exactly,
basically. Okay.
exactly.
And then on page 9, number of completed investigations, I'm looking at the 16-17, July through October, which is just the first quarter, and it says 514. But since that's just one quarter, we're actually on track, it looks like, to possibly complete more than we did in 15-16.
It's 4 months, not 3.
July, okay,
So it's a
sorry.
third,
So it's a
yeah.
third of a
It's a
year,
third.
third of a
Yeah,
year.
so then you get like 1,500
Oh,
compared
okay.
to 2,000. And the same with the licensee complaints, you get like
I got you.
700 instead of 1,000.
Thank you for
So sorry.
correcting
Yeah,
my
it's not
mathematical
a-
mistake there.
It's not a quarter. It's under, we put like a parenthetical 4 months under that to
Right.
clarify that, yeah.
And then, since it's in here, we might as well talk about the CE audit.
Okay,
I know that in one of your previous reports, the board was concerned that there weren't enough. And then now we have the opposite problem. Now we have a mass. And my understanding of that is that it was supposed to go out on a long-term schedule, that they were supposed to have an increase in CE audits, and that it was supposed to happen over a period of time with staggered mailings, but that they all went out at one time, which was not this board's intention to send all those CE audits out, thousands of CE audits out at one time. So yes, I can see where that had a problem. So it's either feast or famine with the CE audits.
I'm not sure what the staggered, I've heard this, I've seen emails about it and other documentation and information about the staggered phased mailings. But what's never clear in any of the information I've seen is what that time frame was supposed to be or what the staggering was supposed to be.
Okay.
And I think it really misses the point that you were doing 1,000 a year.
Right.
And let's just say for simple numbers, the new number was 50,000. Unless you were talking about staggering that over like a period of 5 to 10 years, it's still an overwhelming increase
Number.
in the number of audits you were going to complete. And I don't that doesn't connect with any, why would you order 70,000 envelopes
Right.
if you were going to stagger them out over 5 to 10 years? So I don't know nobody's ever answered the question of, well, what is this staggered phasing? If you're talking, even if it was over a period of a year, it's still the same end result. There's no capability, as best
Just
I
too
can
big of a
determine,
number.
to complete 50,000 audits, even if you don't mail them out over, you extended the mailing out over a period of a full year.
Right.
So it still kind of misses the point.
So even within a year, 2 years, it would
Even
still be
with 2
overwhelming.
years.
It would
Yeah,
still be
it's like you're talking mailing out 25 or 30,000 a year. And if you take that number and say, well, I need just 15 minutes to complete each audit, and the time requirements to complete these audits aren't so intensive on the people that immediately respond and provide you, as one person emailed to me, because they couldn't get through the board's fax machine, so they sent their
Oh, 'cause it-
materials, they emailed it to me and asked me if I could forward it along.
Wow.
They're submitting a letter and several certificates of completion, and you say, okay, they complied. That's your 15-minute case. Your problem is with the people that didn't comply.
Don't have the
And
record.
sending follow-up letters and certified letters and going, or they submit documentation that isn't within, for classes that weren't completed within the period, or they're sort of completed, or there's some question about whether they qualify, what they completed qualifies.
So it's 15
And-
minutes for an easy case? a
Yeah, the
standard-
15 minutes is probably just an easy case, just to open the mail, keep track of the emails, keep track, because some of it's coming in electronically, some of it's coming in hard copy, answering the phone calls, setting up the file systems, tracking them, maybe sending out a closing letter, you complied.
Right.
Like, as opposed to like whatever happened to it. And so you've probably got 15 minutes there on the ones that you close.
And so what I hear you, I think what I hear you saying, because this board, we see information at a high level, and we don't always know the direct operational things that go on at the very minute level. But what I think I hear you saying is that we just don't have enough staff to complete this. We don't have that infrastructure.
I don't know what, well, the number of staff that would appear to be needed, and again, I just learned about this problem, so, in December, and it was a surprise to me, and I'm gathering from what you're saying was a surprise to you, which also prompts a number of questions. Why is that a surprise? The board should not be surprised if there's a decision made to initiate a large-scale audit that's completely different from what was done previously. And it's certainly not consistent with what is presented in your sunset report as to what kind of change you're going to make on CE audits.
Right.
So somehow there was a disconnect in the communications to the board.
Right.
I don't know what the solution is, or what the staffing is, or what the plan is. Like I said, I still don't even understand all the details, and you haven't made it clear to me, what's the phasing that was talked about? What was the plan? How was this ever going to be accomplished without disrupting
The operations.
all the other operations? I've tried myself over the past several weeks to call the board. It's not been scientific. I call the board's main number when I'm driving around. It might be in the morning, it might be in the afternoon. Sometimes it's once a day, sometimes it's several times a day. 90% of the time, I get either disconnected or I'm told the board's phones are too busy, they can't take my call.
Because we have this influx of calls now
Okay.
coming in, right?
That's just the phone issue. Then there's the email issue. Then there's the mail issue. There's the information I'm hearing from staff that are crying out about it, not just to me, is that there's a multiplicity of adverse impacts.
Yeah, I can see.
You
how
got
that would happen.
overtime. I understand all of the enforcement division managers, along with other staff, were pulled from their regular duties for a full day just to open mail.
I'm not sure what's going on.
Because they need to get the enforcement mail separated. The mail that comes in, it doesn't go to a separate post office box. They did
It
set up
came-
a separate email box for the emails,
Right.
yay, but there's not a separate post office box for the paper submissions.
So it all comes in
So
at
the paper
once.
submissions come in with all the other board submissions, some of which are time sensitive. And you have to open up the mail.
Right, that's true. I have also a question, or actually more of a comment on page 16, when we talk about the vacant positions and the hiring, because you're correct, it does look alarming that such our assistant executive officer has been vacant for so long. And I know that your job is just to report the facts. That's what you do in your report, is report the facts. But I would at least like it said for the record that the board did have a restructuring program. When we got our new EO, we actually were going to redevise the whole org chart, and this board voted on it and approved it. And the plan in itself, I feel, was a very good plan and would have worked. But part of that was changing the assistant executive officer position. It was chosen not to hire that position while the restructuring, we felt the restructuring was going to go quickly, and that we were going to have more cooperation from others that would help us, needed to help us do the restructuring. And it actually was, I mean, I can just speak for myself and for our executive committee, that it was very frustrating that it didn't, the restructuring didn't happen as we would have hoped. That was sort of a cornerstone of part of our plan, and that we didn't get the level of cooperation that I had hoped, honestly, we would have received from other areas. So yes, these have stayed open because we were planning on doing the restructuring. So I know that's definitely part of it. And yeah, that'll have to be rethought now. You are correct.
I think the issue here is that and you know, I participated in some of those conference calls with you on this restructuring early on. The issue is once that there was the first decision not to fill the position pending the new appointment of a new executive officer. Then there was the restructuring. Once that was denied, the question becomes, do you continue to try to pursue it, or do you go to Plan B?
Right.
And the problem with leaving that position vacant for that long a period of time is that's a key management bench strength position. And you leave yourself vulnerable, which may be part of Cal HR's rationale for why you still needed an assistant executive officer position, is it leaves you vulnerable as an organization not having these key management positions filled. Either, as I said, either reclassify it and fill it, or fill it as is and utilize it however you want.
Right.
But to leave these positions vacant, have them vacant for extended periods of time is harmful to the organization and leaves you vulnerable to sudden shocks.
Right. And there was some confusion, you're correct, that went along with that restructuring. And part of the problem was that, at least from my own perspective and the information I was receiving from others, is that we were getting mixed messages that there is still hope this is going to happen, don't worry about it. And then we were also seeing evidence that, no, this is not going to happen, this denial is firm, and you need to hire someone. So it was, you're right, we were caught in limbo a little bit, and I honestly had hoped that it would happen. I think it would have been great for the board. I think that our new org structure would have done wonders. Obviously now, we're here, and it's doesn't look like it is going to happen. So you're correct, we're going to have to rethink that. We're going to have to fill those positions. And like I said, I understand that you just report the facts. However, I did want to at least say that.
I understand, and I understand that background. I think the thing I would like to bring to this board's attention is that as you sit here today, I think you don't even have a recruitment going on for that position. You haven't even started the process for filling that position. So that's.
Okay. If that's the case, that was not what I was told. I
Have
was
you
told
started
that
a
we
recruitment
did, that
for
it
it?
was posted, and that's what I was
It's
told.
been posted? Okay. Has that happened recently?
As far as I know, but now you're telling me
Okay.
something different, so
Okay.
I'm not
And
gonna.
I may be
I'm not
mistaken.
gonna-
I was not aware. I went through, in December, I went through with Dr. Brown.
Okay.
A listing of all of the open positions and what the status was, and it was not disclosed to me that there was an active recruitment going on for that
Okay.
position. In fact, what was going on then was, Dr. Brown confirmed it, and I had talked to DCAHR about it, is that they were trying to set up a third meeting with Cal HR to further appeal it. So if if that changed subsequent to that, then I stand corrected, and I'm sorry, but that's where it was as of mid-December.
My understanding was that, as of this year, was that third meeting wasn't going to happen, and that actually the AEO, Assistant Executive Officer position, had been posted. That was my understanding.
Okay.
I have not checked that to verify
That would be
the
a step in the
accuracy.
right direction. That would be good.
And then just two more comments. On page 19, I totally understand what you're saying about the oversight of the enforcement division and the separation of the sole supervisor and extended leave of absence of our chief of enforcement. And I agree with you, that was detrimental to our board, and honestly, we didn't see it coming. You know, that was something that I couldn't have predicted, I don't think anyone could have predicted, and yeah, honestly, it did hurt us. You're right, it did. It took some of that top-level management out of the Enforcement Division. Unfortunately, I don't think there's anything that I know of we could have done to prevent that or even predict that. So I agree with you, that's unfortunate. And then just on page 20, you're talking about a 360-degree evaluation. And this is just my own opinion. I haven't obviously talked to anyone else about it, but I don't think that's a bad idea. I worked in the private sector, and many executives would have a 360 performance review from within the agency, different departments. And so I know that that's done. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, although I haven't had the opinions of any other board members. So I just wanted to say that. Do board members have any questions for Mr. Frank? We'll start here, I think, Mr. Deerking and then Ms. Norton.
Yes, I just want to revisit the CE issue,
Okay.
because there are certain assumptions, and primarily the assumption is that every one of the submissions is going to be reviewed, rather than archiving the data, having the submission on record so it can be referred to. Did you assume that every submission would be reviewed, Mr. Frank? 50,000?
I'm not, again,
58,000
I don't
plus?
know what the plan is, but even if you just want to, if you're not going to review it, then I guess you're not going to let the submitter know that they've been audited. You told them they were being audited, and you're not going to tell them what the results of the audit were. It's just going to go on the shelf. You're just going to take all the paper, you're going to create a file, you're going to put it in your tracking system, and you're going to put it on the shelf.
Well, that's
To
another.
maybe look at it at a later date.
Right, but that's another assumption regarding how
Right, but
the
even
CE
that,
process was
even
going to
that
play
takes
out.
time. So there's some amount of time to even do that, to just archive and index the records,
Which would be required anyway.
which would be required anyway. So I
Well,
I guess
I'm
if
just
you
con-
want to get all the information.
No,
and not-
I'm just a little bit concerned because one of the previous recommendations was to audit a sample reflected as a percentage of the active licensees on CEs.
Correct.
Right, and you came up with the 5% figure?
Right, because, again, as we talked about, I think it was at the November 4th meeting.
Right.
And you questioned, where are you getting the 5% number? And I said, well, because you have such apparently a high level of noncompliance with your requirements, at least maybe 10 to 15%. Your own data, I then got subsequently showed 20% noncompliance, that you probably ought to try to boost it, but you have to balance that with your ability to provide resources to support that auditing effort and gather more information, maybe better quality information,
Right.
and determine what steps to take from there.
Right.
And, so if you would boost to, doing 1,000 to 1,500 a year to maybe 2,500 or 3,000 a year, or maybe you could redirect one position to help that. You would have positions doing the auditing, but you also have a flow-through to enforcement, which is a whole nother workload in terms of issuing citations, dealing with the appeals of those, collecting the fines, and so on. So I thought that would be a measured first step. That's there's a big gap between that and 50 or 60,000
Well, there certainly
mailings.
is.
Why are you going to do 50 or 60,000 mailings and pay for all of the cost of doing that if you're just going to take all the paper and put it on the shelf for 10 years?
Well, I would argue that we have a trove now of data upon which we can rely in the future if we don't approach it in a measured way. In other words, we could do a graduated CE audit rather than auditing all at once. And in all fairness, I believe your 5% audit penetration presupposed either cross-training or new staff, right?
Well, I assume maybe an augmentation of maybe one position to boost, because I also assume streamlining the process along the lines of what they did. But I still don't understand how you're talking about, we're going to collect 50,000 submissions from people. Well, first, you're not going to get all the non-submitters, which is really your problem isn't the people submitting the paper. The problem is the people that don't submit.
Right, that's a whole different
Okay,
issue.
so that's the purpose of auditing, is really to flush those out and to look at people that submit and they say, oh my God, I got this audit letter, and they get online and they take courses and then you submit that and it's outside of the audit period, which is non-compliance. And you're saying basically, I'm gonna take all those and put them on the shelf, and then over the next 10 years, I'm gonna audit those. Well, what's the point of auditing, collecting the paper now, if you're not gonna look at it for years down the road? I don't understand the project
Well,
that
yeah, again.
you're theorizing about. It doesn't make any, why wouldn't you just do 5,000 a year to begin with? And get the paper and complete the audits?
Well, again, there are certain assumptions, right? I mean, you would agree that, you know, based on the program as it's been laid out, based on the sheer volume of mailing, we will have certain challenges.
Well, but if this was if this was the plan, and again, no staff articulated a plan like that to me, you then, this board then adopted a plan that overflowed your fax machines, overflowed your email systems, overflowed your phone systems, overflowed your mail room, caused you to go into overtime, all so you could collect paper, put it in a file, and put it on the shelf.
Well, let me
That
ask,
doesn't make any sense,
No, no, I
Mr.
understand.
Deering. All due respect, that doesn't seem responsible.
well, if we jump to that particular conclusion, but let me ask, did you reach out to staff to kind of shadow as far as what the revamped CE process would look like?
I talked to staff about it. Staff went through with me and explained to me how they were doing the new project. Instead of doing 3 letters, they went to 2 letters. They were going to do a 30-day and then a 15-day. How many 15-day letters have gone out? How many second letters have gone out to this point? How many audits have been completed? And it's not an issue of how many people submitted paperwork and the paperwork is good. The whole purpose of doing the audit is to improve compliance.
Yes, certainly.
And to find out who's not complying. How many have you gotten from staff any information about the results of their audits to date? How many have they gotten in?
I got one, mine.
They got your, I sent in an email. I had a friend of mine send in an email.
I sent in the actual packet, and within 30 days, I had a letter back saying it's been audited and I'm in complete compliance.
Okay, yours is good.
Yeah. Well, I had hoped, but the thing I have to concern myself with, I'm sorry.
I'll defer to Mr.
I
Vertito.
wasn't sure if Mr. Deerking was finished
No,
with his.
Mr. Vertito's point appears to be germane. I'll
Okay.
yield.
And we can't forget about Ms. Norton, who was next in line.
I yield,
Okay, so, is it my turn?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you for your report. The problem that I have with this report, and as I understand it, your role was to come in, take a look at the data.
I can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. That might have been better. Okay, so thank you for your report.
Sure.
In reading the report, and it was very lengthy, there seems to be a lot of data in this report. The part that's missing for me, and I'm speaking only for myself, is the whys of what happened.
The what?
The why. Like, there's a lot of data, we don't know why these things happened. And there's some recommendations that are going to be done. But it seems like for whatever reason, and again, I'm only speaking for myself, that there seems to be a struggle. It seems that the board, the staff, and the monitor, that we're at odds with each other instead of working with each other. So that is concerning to me, because the public and the licensees are the ones that suffer. I personally, I have not gotten I got audited, but I have not gotten back anything from the board saying that my audit was received or it's been looked at. And mine was concerning to me because I had college credits that I called the board and said, is this going to suffice? And I received well, yes, it should suffice, but I'm not confident that it has sufficed. And with the advent of, so I tried to fax it in for days and I couldn't get through. I tried to call and I couldn't get through. I didn't think of emailing it to you, or I would have.
Thank you.
However, my concern is I don't want to get into a situation where we have, let's just say we had 20,000 people that returned their things. And it's going to take us a year and a half to open those and look at them and audit them. And then a year and a half from now, we send them something that says, your CE from 2 years ago wasn't correct, because now they'll be due for their next CE. And what do we do at that point? That seems like an unfair circumstance to happen to licensees. This whole thing about, I don't know how it was determined to mail out 58,000, that seems unreasonable, or 50,000, that seems very unreasonable to me. But what's done is done, and we have to move forward. We have to come up with a plan to fix what has happened, to deal with what has happened. And with all due respect, Mr. Durkee, I don't think archiving it and not dealing with it is fair to the licensees or to the public. Regarding the, and I apologize because I was not able to make most of your meetings that you presented to the board. And in trying to read, I have a regular JOB, I work 40 hours a week. In reading this, I'm trying to keep up with it. Regarding the board relying on the executive officer, I do rely on the executive officer. I just have to admit, I do rely on the executive officer. There's no way for me to know what's happening at the board. Perhaps and again, I do want to point out that for a long time, we have a new executive officer. So she came at the time that all of these things were coming to light. A lot of your report refers to things that took place during our old executive officer. I think the 360-degree multi-rater is a great idea because there's no way for me to know what's going on with the executive officer because I don't have the ability nor the time to reach out to the staff and figure that out. So the last thing that I want to say is that I don't know where we go from here, but it seems like we need to have a very dedicated work group that's going to take this report, sit down with the powers that need to be, and I don't believe that's the governing board because I wouldn't know what to do, nor would I have the time to go there and do it. But something needs to be done with a firm, substantial path forward to get us out of the mess that we're in, or this is just going to continue to snowball because the current state of what's happening at this board is deplorable. Thank you.
Mr. Vertito, did you have comments?
Yes, thank you, Madam President. Mr. Frank, thank you to add my appreciation for the report. I've been on the board probably, with the exception of Mr. Bronstein, I am one of the oldest members in my tenure on the board. And I've seen the board change, and I've seen the work levels and the employee. I do live in the area. I do go to the office. I do interact with the other members of the staff, whether it be education or it be discipline, or rather enforcement. And I see them out work. I walked into offices or cubicles where there is so much work in their work area. There's a pathway from the entrance to the cube to their desk, and the rest is surrounded by paperwork. I've been here when we had one NEC and one supervising NEC covering the entire state, and that went on for years. I've been at where we had the mass exodus of NECs because they got a 20% raise going to another location within the state, and we couldn't keep up with it. That is a problem we still have today, is the pay inequity for our NECs. And these are master's prepared level nurses that can make quite a bit more money outside in the private sector. In regards to enforcement, I remember when we went away from DOI with pro rata, and we couldn't judge how much we pay where they gave us the bill and we had to pay regardless of the amount of cases that were processed. And that was when we requested our own investigation section to try to take off the pressure and basically save some money in implementing our own investigation system. But that's also the time when the state went bankrupt, when the housing market fell apart. And the entire board was put on a 4-day, 32-hour mandatory work week across the board, and that went on for years. We weren't able to fill positions because there was a hiring freeze going on. We couldn't compensate our staff because we weren't allowed to offer overtime, so the paperwork piled up. Now, right now, it's all coming to roost. We can't get staff because pay is inequitable. Staff are leaving because the amount of work that's being done. I suspect that outside agencies are adding to the workload to create some of this chaos.
I don't understand that.
Because of the problems that are existing, investigations are being started for reasons that are not clear. And that's creating havoc with the leadership because then they have to do additional work to answer allegations or investigations or reports being generated or being caused outside or allegations being accused at in the board. So we are having turmoil having to serve 2 or 3 masters from the amount of work being generated. It's to the point where our executive officer is not here. This is, with the sunset report, years ago, because we were sunsetted, because the legislature, the Assembly, and the Senate went out of session, the board was turned into a bureau for a period of time and was brought back with the next assembly, state assembly, and Senate. We were sunrised. With this report going forward to the Assembly and Senate, and with the board in turmoil, they may choose not to sunrise us again, allow us time to sort it out. With the communications that we're getting from various personnel, we are being asked to go certain ways, to consider not our own faculty and our own ability to disseminate information, but we're being advised to go and listen to certain things. We had good leadership. We still do. But the amount of external pressure being put on this board, this CE, nobody could find the information, nobody could find the work order. It could have gone from 5,000 to 50,000 by the stroke of a key. And yet we can't figure out who's the one who added the extra 0. Was it a typo? Any reasonable person, noting the framework, the time to process 50,000 would never have allowed that to go forward. Yet somehow it went forward. People here, the leadership here, have advanced degrees. They are all critical thinkers. They are all good time managers. They are all good human personnel managers. Why would somebody let 50,000 letters go out for an audit and not have the expectation of being able to process them in a timely manner? So the question I have to ask is, who did it and why? Where did the error take place? Was it an error or was it intentional? And yet we don't have either one of the answers. We're looking at the result, but we have to also look at what started it. Now, it may have been time-phased for 5,000, but who in their right mind would order 50,000 and expect to process them in a reasonable amount of time? That's what I want to figure out. What is the source of the problem? We have the problem. We have to deal with that also. But while you make mention of it here, we don't bother to look at who caused it. Why did it occur?
Yeah, Mr. Vertito, I interviewed over 24 staff on December 7th and 8th, right when this was going. One of the beginning, the first few interviews on the 7th, and continuing all the way through the final interviews on the 8th with representatives of your leadership team. I was consistently told the same thing.
50,000.
We're doing 58,000, and it's not a problem. It's just a project. We're going to absorb it. There was awareness all up and down the food chain. Everybody was on the same page about what was going on. and it was going to be done. The cows were already out of the barn. It had started in late November. It was going to be concluded by mid-December. It was going to be concluded by the following week. The mailings would be done.
December of last year.
December of last year. So we were interviewing on the 7th and 8th, and as of the afternoon of the 8th, I was told very specifically by your leadership team that the mailings would be completed by the end of the following week, which would be like the 15th. And there was nothing to do to stop it from going out at that point. I later learned that on the 9th of December, on Friday, board staff contacted DCA's Business Services Office and asked them to do 50,000. I haven't, and meanwhile, in background, the 70,000 envelopes, window envelopes were being ordered. And then there were some delays, and there was a bunch of back and forth and communications, and I haven't sorted it all out. I had a report to write. My job is to is to gather and provide information. I've given you a tremendous amount of information about the history, to answer the question about why, what went wrong in 2012, 13, 14. And based on learning what went wrong and the lessons learned, what can be done to improve it going forward, and I provided you recommendations about that. I can't answer all of the detailed questions you're asking now. I think the more operative question is, what's the path forward? It really is at this point.
May I just have one comment, Madam President?
Yes, and then we'll get to the other side of the
Okay, sure.
table.
I never advocated shelving 58,000 audits. My expectation is we would move forward in an orderly, measured fashion. We will complete a substantial number of audits. My point was simply, we now have documents. We now have a basis for auditing a substantial number of licensees. And I would submit that there is no other department or bureau that has that kind of audit penetration. Now, whether we do it in a month or 2 months or a year, we have the historical data, and I understand.
Thank you.
I think you have to balance that question. How does that priority compare to all of your other workload and demands and priorities? And
Exactly,
you
we
know,
have
we
other
have
priorities.
backlogs in enforcement, and if you do these audits, that generates more workload for enforcement when you have complaints that are languishing. And then there's these reported problems in licensing. And so how, you know, again, as a board, you have to balance all the needs, and how did all of a sudden the CE, now that we've got the CE project, that's going to become our highest priority and redirect resources to doing that and let these other problems languish?
No.
You can't answer that question in isolation like that, or I think you're missing the bigger problem.
And I agree with echo what has been said. I want to get to the other side of the table. We won't have an answer today of how it happened or why it happened. As has been mentioned, several of our executive team are, like our enforcement chief on leave, are not available. So the people who could probably give us those answers are not available today. But as Ms. Norton said, we have a problem today, and we're going to have to figure out how to deal with it. And that's, I think, what's most important now. I would like to say for the record that we're not going back to the enforcement delays we had in 4 or 5 years ago. That will never, that can never happen. So let's put that on the record. Now, I would like to go on to the other side. Let's start with Mr. Ma. I saw you motioning. You have some comments or questions?
Thanks. Good morning, Mr. Frank. So I'd like to focus our attention on your slide 20. So if you recall, the first time we met was by phone. I actually was calling in and you were presenting. And I had asked, how do we prevent what happened in the past from repeating itself again? And I hoped that your reports would give us firm recommendations, because in the past with the previous executive officer, we have what I think we have now today in some way. That is a board that receives almost entirely all of its information, whether correct or misinterpreted or incorrect from one person, and that is the executive officer. The board has very little insight, except what we learn in things like the Sacramento Bee, about what's happening in the infrastructure. And while we may get letters from or communications from possibly board staff, because sometimes they're anonymous in nature, otherwise we have very little insight, and so we do rely heavily on the board. My sense is that you are here as an enforcement monitor in part because of that, is that the previous executive officer was not performing. That's the allegation. I don't think it was ever, wasn't ever actually made public exactly what happened, but it was serious enough that you and as the enforcement monitor were brought in. I am concerned about your recommendation of the 360, which comes in part from me, and that was a request that I had made with the previous executive officer. I was concerned about performance, and because we have very little insight into the executive officer's day-to-day performance, I had suggested to one or two members that maybe a 360 evaluation could be beneficial in evaluating the executive officer. But it didn't get any ground, and then that executive officer left, and so here we are. I bring this up because I feel like we are repeating ourselves in that, and the 360 evaluation is not going to get us there. The 360 evaluation is a tool to help an individual, and I brought it up, and that's why I'm bringing it up. But I want and I hope that in your next report, you address how this board, how DCA, how the governor's office, how the legislature can all work collaboratively, because it is a shared responsibility. I think a lot of the responsibility rests on this board to hold the executive officer accountable. But it is not just one of us that is solely responsible for the charge. And so I don't find, with all due respect, and I know your report is long, what I see as one of the most critical fixes that this board can survive, that is it's not being addressed, is the roles and responsibilities of the board. I think there is an ignorance about what our roles are. I profess it. I was not prepared when I was appointed to know what is now I'm learning is expected of me. The board is trained by the executive officer, which is an inherent conflict of interest, and DCA was nowhere really to be found except completing sexual harassment training and one ethics training every 2 years and submitting my 700 form. And so my point here is that I hope you can address this real need, because my sense is that the staff, there's a lot of struggle at this point. We are in a tough spot, but I still don't know what the truth is. I will tell you that you've been blamed for the adversarial relationship. That's what was my explanation. And so I also wanted to give you an opportunity, because you and I have spoken outside of the board meetings, to discuss whether you feel like you are the responsible for the adversarial relationship and what your interactions with staff have been. Because I think for some boards, and maybe I'm alone, but board members, they may think that you come at this project with a biased point of view. I personally do not feel that way. I've looked at your resume. I've looked at how many organizations you've worked with within the state of California. It is impressive, but I think it would be helpful for this board to hear from you what your reaction is to the notion that you are part of this problem.
Do you feel comfortable in answering that, Mr. Frank? Or I hate to put you on the spot in such a
I
way.
want to give you an opportunity to defend yourself in a way, right? Like I have a impression of you, and I want you to give me a sense, if you're comfortable, but it will help us, I think.
Well, Mr. Ma, that's an interesting question. I need to think a little about how to respond to it. One of my comments back is, I'm sort of like the umpire behind the catcher in the baseball game. My job is to gather information and provide it, not just to this board, to all the audiences of this report. I just give you the balls and the strikes, and I'm sorry if you get some strikes. You know, I'm the happiest guy in the world if I can just, you know, give you good calls all the time. And I think I genuinely tried to do that in my first report and even extending into the second report, where I reported on the turnaround. I'm your champion when you're going south. I'm a tool, I'm available to help support the implementation of the improvements that you need. So if for a simple example, delegating default decisions, I'm somebody that can help get that into the report. I talk to the legislative staff, we work through it and get it moving and accelerate those types of things that have maybe been stalled. And on the other hand, if things are going south, it's my job to say it. And if anything, and even in this last report, I've gone to great lengths to talk about the turnaround, to talk about the improvement, and at the same time say, hey, things have stalled, the improvements aren't continuing, it's not getting better, cycle time, the backlogs aren't going down, the completion rates aren't going up, the cycle times aren't getting shorter, problems with turnover, problems with morale, and so on. I was happy when the staff said morale was better, which they did last March. And it's tough on me to have to come here 6 months later or 8 months later and say, hey, board, I'm getting a different message. I'm sorry I have to do that. And if that becomes adversarial, I can't help it. I'm just doing my job. I'm not here to be adversarial. I'm a much happier guy working collaboratively, and I tried to do that, and I was basically directed in the fall to transition into more of an audit role, that the assessment had been largely completed, and I should just move in to gather information and report it and let the powers that be decide what to do, which includes you. And so I've moved into that role. I'm not going in and mixing it up with anybody on a day-to-day basis for a number of months now. I gather my information and I report it to you.
And certainly,
you can take it and move it from there. So
certainly, I don't want there to be any perception or I don't want you to feel that you have to defend yourself in any way.
No, and I don't.
So I just want to make that clear, and I appreciate Mr. Ma giving you the opportunity because to clear things up. And like I said, I believe your job is to report the facts, and then we get the facts, and you've generated your report to do so. So I don't want you to feel attacked or on the defensive. I just want to put that out there.
I got a thick skin, and it'll, you know, that's. But I still, I mean, even to this point about like the CE thing, I mean, nobody's challenging the facts. There's all this other, you don't agree with the recommendations, but then you're implementing the recommendations or whatever. I mean, it's, I don't understand it all. I just.
So one other thing, so, I mean, it's a tough report to read, but I actually see your role as a kind of gift to the board to give us new data and another perspective. It's not one we want. No board wants an enforcement monitor, but I think it is, you're an extra resource and another set of eyes and ears to the process. And with that in mind, I'll just ask one more question, though I have many others, but I want others on the board to ask. Is another thing I've seen missing from your report is staffing assessment. I sense a kind of contradiction in that on the one hand you'll say these delays of enforcement or there's backlogs, but I don't hear you saying what's the right number, what processes, you know, are we adequately staffed? Are the board members doing enough work? I've heard you say we are staffed, but then it's confusing to read why we have the backlogs if we are adequately staffed, or if the board is now properly engaged in our subcommittee work. I'll tell you, I've spent more time on the board business in the last 3 months than I've in a long, long time, and that is not I am up for, I'm eligible for reappointment by the speaker. I'm not sure I would want to be reappointed because the work is so great. But, so if you can address that, you don't have to do it here, but in a future report, because I understand you don't have to change a word of any of your report, and it may be too late for that anyway, but I would like you to address at some point
No, I can-
these things.
I think I can actually address that now.
okay, great.
As part of Phase 2, I actually worked very closely with the Chief of Enforcement. We actually put together a workload and a staffing model. We did an analysis of staffing, and completed that assessment. It was pretty detailed. It was never completely finished for reasons that I could maybe talk about separately, but it was substantially completed, and overall, the result was, and we talked about the staffing of the non-sworn investigators at the previous meeting. I don't know, you may not have been there for that one.
No.
But overall, the number of positions authorized for the Enforcement Division is fine. There was, and I made very specific recommendations about adjustments and realignments of workload and staffing for the Enforcement Division, and that was really considered an important part of the Phase 2 assessment. And the scope of my work did not extend to doing that same kind. Now, part of the problem you got now is, again, management structure. They're like the suspension cables on the Golden Gate Bridge. You don't have the suspension cables there, the bridge is going to collapse. Okay, management is important, and we have problems there, okay? And 2, you need to keep your positions filled. I always say, managers in state service have 2 tools in their toolbox, really. They have their staff to get things done, and they have contractors. They can contract out sometimes to get things done. And that's what they have. And those are invaluable tools. And when you have staff turning over, when you have vacancies, when the vacancies are saying you're losing capability. So your reasons for your backlog are not because of not having enough authorized positions in enforcement. You've demonstrated that you can reduce your backlogs. You stopped reducing the backlogs. So something, and the staffing didn't change, not in terms of authorized positions. So other things changed. So that's my assessment on the staffing, and I don't know how much more clear I can be about it. I thought we cleared that up the second phase, but that's the end of that. On the rest of the organization, my scope of work, again, did not encompass doing that type of an assessment on licensing or education. Okay, so it's not there, and as far as it sits right now, it's not going to be there. It's not part of my scope. Now, if somebody changes my scope, then we can go back and revisit that, but it's not there. So you can't keep asking for it because it's not, I'm not going to be gratification for you. Third level, it's not part of my scope to assess. I've had assessments where I have assessed the size and composition of the board. Your
I remember
business unit, if you will. That's not part of my scope. That could change again, but as it stands, it wasn't in the legislation. It's not part of my scope.
It's not part of your contract.
Not part of my contract. It's not part of the legislation. The legislation talked about communications to the board, supplying the board with information, training of board members. It didn't say anything about size and composition of the board. So I didn't do that.
And you are an
okay?
enforcement monitor, like you said, the administration and licensing is
And the
not in your-
administration stuff is defined.
Exactly.
I've had other projects where it says I'm supposed to look at the licensing process. This one didn't. If DCA had contracted for me to do it, you might say, why are you doing that, DCA? Because that's not in the law. He shouldn't be doing that. Instead, they didn't do it, and then the criticism is, I should have done it. So, you know.
Either way, right? Either way.
Either way, there was plenty of opportunity. At the end of Phase 1, there was a sit-down with DCA, your executive officer, and me, and we went through and developed a work plan for Phase 2 and 3. You had already had Phase 1. You had the report. It said, here's what the work was to be done. It also said, here's the planned work for Phases 2 and 3. And nobody said, go do this other stuff. at that time. That was in June. Nobody said, whoa, 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 we need to look at composition of the board or size of the board or look at licensing differently or whatever. Nobody said that. Nobody at the legislature said it. Nobody at DCA said it. None of you said. I interviewed all of you.
And you're correct.
None of you said it.
You're correct, you have very delineated tasks that are in your contract.
So let me finish.
Mr. Ma.
Let me follow up. So I have this is where you and I disagree. I
Okay.
have your contract, and it says that the administrative and enforcement program monitor shall monitor and evaluate the following: the BVNPT's administrative process with specific concentration on the management of staff, assistance of board members, and working relationship with the legislature, including staff hiring and training procedures, oversight of staff work, evaluation of performance, training of board members, dissemination of information to board members, assistance of board members in performing their duties, communications with legislatures and staff, representation of the board at legislative meetings and hearings. It also specifies that the contractor shall conduct a comprehensive review of all, my emphasis, BVNPT operations, and provide written reports of findings and recommendations. The review will include, but is not limited to, interviews with management, staff, and board members, as well as the analysis of organization, statistical data, legislated critical functions. The report and findings should include recommendations on improving the overall efficiency and consistency of the administrative process and enforcement program. So my interpretation is a broader one, and I can see you want to do a very limited amount of work. I get it. As a contractor, who wouldn't want to do a more finite amount of work? But my interpretation of it is that, and so that's why I keep going to it. So,
And you're correct, and I'm aware of the language you're talking
yep,
about.
but
There
I'm saying it for the benefit of the board
and
members.
and it's okay, and I want to help you to understand the contracting process, okay? There was a request for offer issued by the Department of Consumer Affairs, and it does, in kind of its intro area, have that all language, okay? And then it supplements, it provides an actual scope of work that delineates, here's what the contractor's supposed to bid on, all right? Sometimes that kind of language there's sort of this generic language that's put into bids, and then it's also put into contracts. It carries forward from the bid document into the contract, but there was a statement of work that was also attached to that request for offer. And that's what I bid on, is the statement of work. That's what you're actually bidding on. That delineates what they're asking the contractor to actually bid on. I submitted my bid, and it delineated what I'm telling you I said I would do, consistent with, because also in that bid document, it references AB 179. AB 179 doesn't say all. That's the law. That's it. Regardless of anything else, policy, procedure, what's in the bid document, you're governed by the law,
You're correct.
okay? So the statute is ultimately the governing document. I bid to that document. DCA accepted my bid. They put together a contract. The contract, again, delineated, here's the work that's going to be done by the contractor. Don't put me in this game of I'm trying to play it and limit my scope of work. It never included it. Everybody knew it didn't include it. We talked about it at the kickoff meeting, what the scope of work was. We reviewed it. We had kickoff meetings with your board executive officer. We went through it. There was a chance, if you wanted to possibly change it or adjust it in some way, you could have done that at the end of phase one. We did do that. I accommodated this board by extending the scope of my work into the licensing process with respect to those integrated assessments of how the subsequent arrest records for applicant cases, for licensee cases, for the internal fraud, which turned out to be the continuing education cases. I engineered back into the licensing program wasn't part of my scope of work, and I agreed to do it, just pro bono, basically.
You know-
Okay, I said, I'll absorb that and do those analyses. We'll go into licensing as far as we reasonably can within this contract. We reviewed that with your staff, with DCA, and with legislative staff. Everybody knew what I was doing and what I was not doing.
Mr. Frank?
It is reinventing the history to say I should have been doing it all along.
Mr. Frank, I somewhat agree with you, but I think this is the perfect illustration of my point I was making earlier. For whatever reason, we are at odds with each other, and our task is to move forward and make this board more efficient and more workable, and yet we've just spent a half an hour debating over, did you do what you were supposed to do? Did you do too much? Did you not do enough? Did we know what you were doing? We find we are where we are at because we all found ourselves in this position. We need to be working on a path out of this instead of continuing to stay stuck in it. And I think that's the most important thing in my mind, because am I responsible for not knowing, as Mr. Ma stated, my true roles and responsibility for being a board member? Yes, I would echo what he did. I had no idea that the actual governance of the board would be my responsibility as a volunteer board member. But that being said, I took it on, and I take pride in being on this board. We need to move forward and stop the blame game. You have spent a lot of effort, and we have paid a lot of money. So let's focus on moving forward and not focus on, did we do what we need to do? I think that's where we need to get to. I remain firm in the fact that if we work together and we look at your results, and we hear you and you hear us, and we listen to the staff, that we can turn this around, because we must. So,
And I would agree with you, Ms. Norton, and just add the caveat that as long as your report is your independent opinion, I would agree with that. We have 3 board members that have been waiting so very patiently to get back to the task of asking questions about the actual report. Mr. DeBrownstein, do you have any questions? And we'll turn to Dr. Basti-Martinez and Ms. Endozo.
Okay, I will go quickly on things that I don't believe are duplicative. On slide 16, and I wrote it between bullet points 2 and 3. When you have a changeover in staff so close to within that year of probation, I would wonder how many are good fits. That can come, either Mr. Frank from your analysis or from our own staff. I don't need an answer right now. On slide 20, it's nice to hear that on bullet point number 2, although such dependency is not unique to the BVMPT, when you're talking about board members getting information from one primary source. I think that's the way a lot of boards do it, and I'm glad to see you putting that in there. And I think as a board member with the way Kamika puts information out, either in a newsletter or in an email or keeping us up to date, I think she does a great job in comparison to what I experienced as a board member before, not a member of the executive committee. Okay. The 360 evaluation, I wonder if that's not only a direction for our board, but might be a direction for all of Cal HR to go to. So that recommendation might come.
I think you might mean
through
DCA,
the whole-
not Cal HR.
Say that again?
I think you might mean
Yeah.
DCA, not Cal HR.
No, I mean all.
Oh,
of-
Cal HR in
all-
terms of an evaluation process
Wow,
for
that's a huge-
All
the
state
whole
employees.
all state agencies?
Yeah, why?
Wow, that's a huge.
What state employee
wide
at
net.
the DMV doesn't interact with the
Okay.
public or some form of legislature?
It's been so recommended, my Mr. DeBrownstein.
I don't need answers for those, I just need to get
Not
those
in
out.
my scope.
Not in any of our scopes. Dr. Basti-Martinez?
Thank you, Madam President. In the interest of time, I do not want us to go back over the debate about, is this part accurate, this part not accurate, how did you gather your data? I agree with my colleague about the fact, if we do not work collaboratively, if we do not determine that we're all in this together, nothing is going to advance, and we will have no action that will be corrective And in essence, we will be unable to fulfill our responsibilities, in this case, myself, as a board member assigned to do the work on this board. That said, I do have questions about some of the data. I'm not going to go over that. I think there's been enough of that. I would hope that we can find a time. I know there's a process. We must either accept this report, not accept it, or take some action very, very soon. My hope is that we can put our findings together and make a plan for action to move this entity forward so we can get to a regular, acceptable pace of addressing the work that must be done. We do recognize we have vacancies, but anyone who does hiring knows it takes a while for any new person to get up to, colloquially, snuff. And that there's trial and error in the time. So even with the replacement and the hiring of individuals, we won't see immediate, well, potentially, we may not see immediate change. It will take a little bit. And everyone has to become part of the unit. But we have to do this collectively together. I'm going to hold those other questions. There's really not time to go through everything. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. And I agree with Dr. Bastany-Martinez and Ms. Norton about working collaboratively. I think it's all of our duties, everyone involved. And no, obviously not playing the blame game, but as we move forward, one thing I would like to just put out there is that whoever's on the board's executive committee, opinions need to be respected, and I truly believe that at times, yes, the authority of this board has, there have been attempts to try to bypass it and to not give the executive committee we had last year either respect or take their concerns seriously. So as we move forward, who's ever on our executive committee this upcoming year, I think that that committee needs to have equal standing with the players at the table. And I would just like to put that out there. Ms. Mendoza, any questions?
Thank you. So I know that we beat everything to pulp, but I want to go back to the CEs because I've been licensed since '96. This is my first CE audit. And I understand that at some point there was a stay in regards to the CEs not being done because of other issues, and this was a while ago. So I would think that within 20 years of being licensed, I would have had more than this first audit done on me. That is unacceptable. Yet I do agree that the amount that has gone out is enormous, but you're citing times and things without even doing a desk audit on any of the people who are auditing the mail coming in or anything like that. You have not sat behind or stayed with them during a desk audit to even have accurate numbers or accurate information. That is one thing that I do have an issue with, because if you're citing times, you need to know that those times are factual and not a guesstimate. Because you're saying, you're basing numbers off of a guesstimate or an average, but you don't even know which ones were average or which ones were not. So, you know, certain things may take 2 minutes, certain things may take 5 minutes. But the overall, to say every audit is going to take approximately 15 minutes to accomplish is very inaccurate.
I never said that that was a standard, and I never pretended that that would be an accurate number. I gave it to you as a reference point, as a point of reference. I said it's a point of reference. I said it's an assumption. You can make up your own assumption. Make it 10 minutes. It takes something, and it's just a number so that you can assess what the impacts are. That's all. I didn't set a standard. I didn't do a desk audit. I never represented that I did. It's 50 or 60,000, and it makes no sense. Okay?
The number is huge.
The
The
number
number
is
speaks for
huge,
itself.
yes.
So
But when you're
it's not a
citing-
matter of me setting a standard. That number's not the right number. I'll be the first to tell you.
Okay, but
Yes.
Mr. Franks, when you're citing numbers in a report that you're doing to give graphs on, you need to cite more accurate numbers. So, whether or not, and like Mr. Vertito said, whether or not it was supposed to be 5,000 or 50,000 or whoever made the error, we never saw whatever information was supposed to go out, okay? But what you're citing here, it looks very inaccurate. Me being a licensee, in 20 years, this is my first one, first CE audit. That to me, and you're saying that this is to catch those that aren't in compliance. Okay? And this is the first one. This is a problem to me. And what number you cited was they were doing 1,000 per year. That's what you were citing. They were doing 1,000 prior to this. If we have approximately 140,000 licensees, 1,000 per year, just VNs, 1,000 per year, does that seem like a valid amount? Or even 1,500 per year? If you want to catch those that are in non-compliance, then 1,500 is not even an accurate reflection of the amount of licensees you have.
Well, you don't have any disagreement with me about that. And in my second report, I have a whole section talking about the deficiencies and inadequacies of doing CE audits, and recommended, as we talked about earlier, boosting the number to deal with exactly the problem you're talking about. So I don't know why you're disagreeing with me about it. I mean, I don't have a disagreement with you about it, so
Not
I don't know
disagreeing
what,
with
and I
you.
don't know what
I'm-
numbers you're saying that I've presented that are inaccurate. Nobody has disputed that whether the number's 50,000 or 60,000 or 58,000 or 57,500, some big number of audits went out. So, and I was told by multiple staff up and down the food chain that it was 58,000, basically, rounded. So, and 50,000 went out, and I have documentation on that went out by the Business Services Office, and there was some number that were being mailed before the work ever went over to Business Services Office. At least that's what I was told by staff. I didn't go there and count them. Okay, I didn't sit there all from mid-November through the end of December counting the mail going out of the mailroom.
Nor would we have expected you
So
to do
it's
so.
not my job to do that. My job is to flag potential problems. I brought them to the attention of management. I surfaced it all up and down the food chain, and you all were aware of it before it ever hit the newspapers, because you had it in the draft report, and you disputed it. It was disputed. Now I guess it's not disputed anymore.
Ms. Mendoza, do you have further questions?
I do, but it's going to just create more. So I'll defer at this time.
Okay. Vice President Moreno, sorry to.
No, that's fine. Thank you for your report, Mr. Frank. And what's been discussed and alluded to from my perspective is that, again, we do receive a great deal of information from our EO. You, on the other hand, have had the privilege and opportunity to speak more directly with staff in the work that you do. And I think from how I'm trying to put together everything, that's where I'm confused. And this is just a general comment, is that I rely on information that's given me by the EO. And then in another aspect, I can read a report, and there seems to be a contradiction. And I think that in some senses, you are better served because you actually speak with staff more regularly than I do. I'm greatly removed from the day-to-day operations. And I know in one of your previous assessments, you had discussed and encouraged the board to take a more active role in speaking with other individuals on gaining information. And I think we would be better served because I think the more information that we get, the different perspectives that we get, the board would be in a better position to make informed decisions. And I'm wondering if in your next report, if you were looking to discuss how the board can then be more engaged with some of our other agencies or staff, so that we can have more information instead of relying on just one source. But I don't know, again, if that would then contradict, from what I recall, our board guidelines, which we discussed, from what I remember, that there should be a separation and almost that we are not allowed to be involved. So I'm confused on how much I can be involved with, because I don't want to violate any of our guidelines that we voted on and approved, but I also understand how it's important, given just some of the changing events that have occurred in our board, and the role and what we can be allowed to do and what we're not allowed to do. So I don't know if you had a comment or thought on that, but I think you probably had a very challenging position because I think you were probably provided with a lot of information and you wanted to be professional in your report, but I think you probably could have said more, but did not. That's just my thoughts.
Thank you, Vice President Moreno. I would like just to add to your comment, yes, about the staff interaction. There is some confusion of how much is appropriate. I know when I was vice president and Mr. Brownstein was president, we visited the board several times and walked around and talked with staff. I also did that as president, even very recently in the past, which I thought was important to get the perspective of staff. I have been since advised by legal that that might not be appropriate. So we do get conflicting messages. I hope you would appreciate that we do get conflicting messages on the appropriateness of that sort of outreach that we'll have to work out. And I would like to say that, yes, we do find ourselves in a difficult situation, all of us, including yourself, including the board. And we have the situation that we have now. Some answers will not be given today because staff are not available to give them. But I have hope that we can move forward because we are all professionals and because we must, to fulfill our sworn duty as to protect the public and to, it's the right and ethical thing to do, that we will move forward and we can find a way to work collaboratively. I have hope for that. And I think that it definitely can be done. And that's the main thing that was expressed here, was let's move forward, let's find a solution. Let's deal with the problems that we have and find ways to fix them, because that's what we're all interested in. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we all have the same goal. I have been advised by legal counsel Marcroft earlier that we do not need to take an action of accepting the report, that we could just simply thank you for your report. There is no actual motion of acceptance that needs to happen. So once again, thank you very much for your report. I know we went a little over.
Madam President, may I make one comment and question very, very quickly?
Sure, very quickly. Okay.
Some of the report is conclusory, and with regards to information sharing by the EO and executive staff, what would you consider be a better model for board members to receive information?
I'm confused on where you're saying what the question, is this the same question about how does the board open up its communications?
Yeah, well,
outside of the executive office, not be so dependent on the executive officer?
Correct. Yeah, what would be a better model for us to receive information?
I think we talked about this and you asked questions about this last time, or I think maybe Mr. Fertitta, somebody did.
Okay.
And again, I think the committees are a vehicle for receiving additional communication and working more directly with subordinate staff in a particular program area. whether it's education, licensing, or enforcement. And you should have some ability to do that outside of the executive officer. And to, as you mentioned, and again, I know there's a balance between, in terms of immersing yourself in the actual operation,
Right.
but you should be able to gather information and as you determine as needed in your role as sort of the advance guard for the board in your assigned area, gather information and bring it back to the board for its consideration. And I think you ought to be able to have some flexibility to identify and determine your own needs to do that, to gather information. It's information gathering.
And I would agree with
And
you.
it's not directing the staff.
I agree with you that our committees are a good vehicle for that. That is one thing that we have gotten, we have reconvened all our committees. Our committees are meeting regularly. That is one good thing that has been happening. As far as outreach to the staff, yes, I would just, with my own personal, I've received conflicting opinions on how much we can do that. I think more is better, personally, but DCA Legal may disagree with that. So,
And I think also it varies with if you identify if there's an issue or a problem, you
Right.
may have to do some work with that, or you may have to find somebody that can do some work with that. So,
so
I-
it's a project we're working on.
Yeah.
We're looking for the answer. Again, thank you for your report, Mr. Frank. We do not need to make a motion on whether to accept the report. No problem. And one thing we do need to actually, hopefully we can do quickly, is that the board would need to take action on is we are entitled to make a response to the report. So how that would happen is we would advise Ms. Anderson what we would want to have in our comments that we would want to be included in our response to the legislature, which we can do now in open session. And then Ms. Anderson would create a draft of that letter.
And
the
then,
response.
and then would we vote on that on Friday? Or how does that work?
Well, we would, Mr. Marcroft, please jump in anytime. From what our conversation earlier, I believe what we would do right now is we would state as a board the things we want included in it, and then Ms. Anderson would incorporate that.
So you mean, so.
We would
Mr.
decide now.
Right, okay, so Mr. Frank submits his report if it hasn't already been submitted to the legislature, and we can send a letter of.
Under separate cover.
Under separate cover, okay,
Correct.
got it. Okay, now, thanks for that, thanks for clarifying. I would want to just make one clarification. There's a question of whether the assistant EO position was posted. I looked online, and I did not see it posted.
Okay.
So,
So I was misinformed by that. Thank you. So, board members, is there, we will be sending a response letter. What would you like included? Mr. Ma, do you have something you would like included? Ms. Anderson is taking notes over here. Anything from this side of the table? I'll let you go first. Mr. Brownstein, Dr. Basti Martinez, Ms. Endozo.
Can some of the discussion points that board members already brought up be included, so we don't have to repeat them, or do we have to officially repeat them for inclusion? Like,
I think what might be most helpful is if you were to identify some of those things so that Ms. Anderson has that specific instruction. If it is a recap of what you identified previously, or just identifying the subject matter so that she has the direction of what it is exactly you want to report.
So I'll start off. One thing that I did bring up that I think should be included is that we were pursuing a restructuring, and we were pursuing a restructuring and a complete overhaul of our org chart that led to some of these vacancies, such as you see that we had hope that the restructuring was going to be approved. So that is one variable that came into play with our vacancies. Also with vacancies, we had no way to predict or know that our chief of enforcement was going to be out on extended leave. And let me see. I think I discussed already the cases. Anything else from this side?
So
Mr. Mon.
I would ask that we specifically seek out board training from the DCA or governor's office or legislature on what our expectations are, our roles and responsibilities. I know this sounds a bit silly in one way because some of us have been on this board for a long time, and during that time we've had some pretty significant problems. So, I've been on this board for, I think, 6 years. I knew nothing about the board, and I consider myself an engaged board member, and I'm still now unsure of exactly how much time I should be investing, and it would be helpful, I think, to make that call. I don't know if this is the right forum. This letter is
Right.
very confusing to me, quite honestly.
It's just a response to
Okay,
the report.
so I guess I would agree with Mr. Frank's report that we need better board training.
Okay.
I think it's a conflict of interest for the executive officer to provide the training solely. I think we need, it would be nice to have, as part of that board member training and even prospective board member appointment, a kind of job description that outlines specifically the time, skills that are helpful to have, the kinds of problems, just like a job description, so someone can join this board who can really commit to it. And I think that's all I would have to say.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Brownson, do you have a couple bullet points for Ms. Anderson?
Yeah. Does somebody want to go first?
Dr. Baste Martinez?
I'll flip
anything-
through and then
Thank you.
I'll get mine in order.
If you please address or at least include the attention and the time we took about discussing the issues or the context in which certain vacancies or work was, the way vacancies occurred and the way work was done or could not be done. Example, the severe budget crisis that affected the work model in the state. When employees are furloughed significantly, there's no way to do the work that does not get attended to.
Thank you.
Additionally, we really need some statement that the board recognizes that there might be a perception that we are not all focused on the same issues, that there might be some contentions or misinterpretations of how we are approaching what is being done.
Thank you. Ms. Mendoza? Vice President Moreno?
I would like to see that the board, taking into the report by Mr. Frank, would begin discussing different methods for oversight of the executive officer, possibly with a 360 review, possibly recommendations that could come from the future executive committee, and also if the subcommittees of the board would, at their next subsequent meetings, discuss how they can then become more involved with staff and having discussions with staff, taking into account that it can be done legally, so that there's no missteps, but to have greater interaction with the committees and the department staff.
Mr. Rotito?
I'd rather defer at this time.
Okay. Ms. Norton?
For me, I would just like it noted in the report that despite where we find ourselves, that this board is committed to moving forward and seeking solutions is my main point, because it doesn't matter how we got, it matters, but it's a moot point how we got here. Let's just move forward.
Mr. Durkin?
May I suggest that Ms. Anderson provide a draft, perhaps in connection with the president?
Well, and we have a limited time frame, so this has to be submitted next week. No, we have till Wednesday, the 15th. So if there's something we want included, we should let her know now. And then her draft will be submitted to us.
I appreciate that.
I would also like to be highlighted, even as in the report it was highlighted, we have made considerable progress. We have had some successes. This isn't all doom and gloom. We've had significant success that has begun to plateau, it seems, in our enforcement division, but we're not satisfied with that, and it's going to continue. Our successes will continue, that we are committed to that. So I would like at least some of our successes highlighted, because I think I'm proud of them. I'm proud of the work that has been done by this board and by the staff. And we find ourselves with a new set of challenges, and we will meet those challenges, and we will move forward, and we will succeed again, is what I'm trying to say. Mr. de Brownstein.
Okay, yeah, I would preface my comments with that we are a board that is solution-focused. I think Andrew covered it with the EO oversight and addressing the 360 eval or whatever best practice is for that type of position. On slide 18, the increase in staff training, that be covered. My earlier comment on page, or on slide 16 about, doing some additional analysis into the turnover rate, and is it because, things happened during that first year while staff were on probation, or is there anything that we can point to? 12, what do I have on page 12?
Is that it for you?
Yeah, on page 12, when we're talking, that's the CE, yeah, okay, that's the C, that staff are looking into solutions for the variance in numbers and amount of workload that we've gotten ourselves into. And on page 8, I think looking at, the nice peak in 15, 16, but then how, I think we agreed that we are seeing a plateau there, that be mentioned, and I believe that's it.
And part of that, yes, was the backlog. So, Ms. Mendoza.
I agree with Todd in regards to, oops, sorry. I agree with Todd, but also we want to reflect that there have been things that we've implemented, and that some of the case backlog is due to some of them being criminal cases, and we can't move forward until those criminal cases are complete. So that also needs to be reflected in there, because as it stands, it's not reflected in Ben Frank's report.
Okay.
So those are things that delay us processing the enforcement of the licensures or the licensees.
Thank you. Okay, if there's nothing else, Ms. Anderson has been taking notes, so we can move forward from here. Yes, okay. Mr. Marcroft.
Madam President, I think it might be helpful to have a motion for the board to direct Ms. Anderson to prepare the report that covers those subjects that were suggested.
Okay, thank you. I move to direct Ms. Anderson to create a letter in response to Mr. Frank's report that incorporates what has been discussed by board members thus far.
I'll second.
Great. Let's take a roll call vote. Oh, I'm sorry, public comment first? There's a motion on the floor. Is there any public comment about the motion on the floor? I don't see anyone coming forward. So at this point, we'll take a roll call vote with Mr. Ma.
So actually, I have a discussion for the board.
Sure.
Yeah, so I mean, I would think it would be good for us to see the text of the letter. I mean, I know we're crunched on time, but if we're sending something to the legislature of such importance, I think it'd be prudent to see
Sure.
the letter. So
That could be done. What I would need is a commitment from board members to review it quickly, because we do have a deadline. So if that's possible, if board members are willing to take the time and do that, I think that could be accomplished.
If I may, Madam President?
Yes.
The concern there is possibly creating some concerns under Bagley-Keene in terms of it becoming a working document or the kind of feedback that could be given. One possible suggestion could be to, and Mr. Deakin alluded to this as well, to have your draft maybe brought back to either the president or perhaps your legislative and regulation committee or your executive committee, something on that level where there could be feedback from a couple of board members without the possibility of a notice of date.
That still seems problematic, potentially, under Bagley-Clean from my point of view, because those people may get feedback from the other board members, and then who decides what edits occur?
Well, agreed, that should
Yeah.
not, in other words, feedback
Can't be
amongst
received.
the board members shouldn't occur, just like Bagley-Keene. So,
Defer to the executive committee to review the letters. What you're saying.
or the legislation committee,
Or any two members, really.
basically true.
So I would
Unless you have the opportunity to bring it back in a publicly noticed session.
No,
we don't.
we have till Wednesday, so no.
Well, I mean, I don't know if there's any agenda item that this could be discussed on Friday. But, so I would volunteer, I'm fine if the board wants to delegate to other individuals, but I would volunteer to read one of the drafts, so.
Do we have another volunteer to read? Mr. Deakin, do you agree to that?
I'm sorry?
Would you agree to be one of the two board members, along with Mr. Ma, to read the draft of the letter proposed by Cheryl and review it?
Certainly.
Okay, so then that would be the letter would then, draft letter would be sent to Mr. Deakin and Mr. Ma to be reviewed before it's sent to the legislature. Okay?
Madam President, I would just assume in the way that goes, once our two colleagues have reviewed and commented, that it would come back to the board president?
No.
Okay, thank you.
A final version could go to the board members, right? That would seem okay.
I think if you're talking the final version that is getting sent.
Yes,
then that
yes.
would have to come to the board first.
So yes, but not for corrections.
That's right.
The final, what's out there, yes, would be made public, but not for corrections.
Thank you. That's my question.
Okay.
So just to clarify that, that's important to understand it. The draft being prepared by Ms. Anderson to be reviewed by members Ma and Deakin, incorporating those comments, Ms. Anderson then submitting the letter.
Yes.
I have a question.
Mr. Vice President
I have a
Moreno.
question. Whose signature is going to be on the letter?
Usually it's the president, I would think, when the board issues correspondence.
It's usually the
Yeah,
president.
it's usually the president.
So once the letter comes to the president, it will just be for signature, but they cannot make changes? Because the president would only want to sign something that they could only put their name if they feel comfortable that that's from their voice. So I think we should consider maybe delegating one of those persons as the president if they're going to be signing it.
Or could we add
Possibly.
another member to the?
Or could you add another member? Right, I'm just thinking if someone's going to sign it, they may want to.
I might not designate them as the president, but maybe just the signatory of the letter. If you want to designate Mr. Ma, Mr. Deakin, or even Ms. Anderson.
Oh, as in on behalf of the board. Well, that makes sense.
Madam President,
Yeah, I'm confused.
The idea was that anyone can sign this letter on behalf of the board. It doesn't matter. I mean, while the tradition is that the president's signature occurs on all of the board correspondence, this one does not. There's no.
Yes, my signature was stamped on correspondence. It was sent out, yes.
Right. Well, and sometimes I imagine you may not have seen these things. But in any case, in this case, if Mr. Deakin and I review it, either he or I, or we could have a member of the staff sign on behalf of the board.
I personally feel fine with either Ms. Anderson's signature being on it or Mr. Ma and Mr. Deaking's signature being on it.
Madam President?
Yes.
I object.
Okay?
You have been elected by this board as the president, and in all of our former procedures, it has been your signature. I strongly recommend, unless we are planning to change the manner in which we operate, that at this time, particularly given the nature of this document, it should be the signature of this board's president.
Okay.
And with that being said, can we just add the board president to this group? Can we have 3 members review the document?
It's not, is that considered a committee or no?
So at that point, you would need to notice your meeting.
That's right.
So that's where you get into the Bagley-Keene issues. I think in theory here, the signatory to the letter is supposed to be expressing the will of the board. So whomever is signing it is signing that the will of the board is captured. You may want to also amend your motion or add another motion that makes clear that you are designating a couple of board members to review the letter and then whomever you have to sign it. That's for the purposes of the public comment and the vote. Because at this point, the motion is simply to have your staff member Cheryl Anderson draft the letter. So in other words, for the purposes of the vote, you probably want to also capture the other actions you're discussing with an official motion.
We're still in discussion. Look, I'm fine not reviewing the letter. I was just trying to be helpful, so I'm happy to
not
not
helpful.
do it, and then it would
Not
be Mr. Deerking and the board president. That's
Okay.
fine with me. I just thought, that, like I said, it's up to the board.
Ms. Norton?
This discussion is public. And I think all the discussions that this board has had with regard to this monitor's report and our feedback and feelings regarding this data, whether it's accurate or whether it's inaccurate, is well out into the public. The fact that we have to spend 20 minutes deciding who's going to write a report, who's going to sign a report, is indicative to me that, do we really need to do that? It's just, it seems to me to be impeding progress. The report is the report. That's just my opinion.
I think, my personal opinion is that we're entitled to give a response, an official response to the legislature on Mr. Frank's report. While the discussions have been public, the traditional, the accepted venue of providing a response directly to the legislature that they will read and absorb is the letter. I think if we don't provide the letter, that it's an obvious exclusion and may be interpreted as that we did not respond.
Madam President, I'm
Yes.
sorry.
I'm not sure that, I understand that we can provide a response, but we're in no way saying that we agree with the report. The report has been submitted. It's his report. We reviewed it, we've submitted it, it's going. I mean, that's all that we're attesting to. We're not in any way saying that we agree with the content of the report.
But we
So
have the right to say what we disagree with and why.
could we just make a blanket statement that we do not, that we do not agree fully with this report, so that it is there? And then if there are questions that they have for us, they can seek us out and go, well, what pieces of it do you not
No,
agree with?
that won't happen. That's
Because
not the way it happens.
We could spend another hour on who's going to do a report and who's going to sign a report.
Right. I think, as the current sitting president, it is vital that we issue an official response letter that shows that we are engaged, that shows that we are giving an official response, that we are taking it seriously, and that we have our voice made known to the legislature. That is my personal opinion. I believe that we're at the point where Mr. Ma said that he does not need to be one of the two people. Yes,
May I
Mr.
suggest
Deerking.
either Mr. Ma and the president or myself and the president?
Yes. So what I would like to do is amend my motion at this time, which was originally to submit a letter of response, which we are entitled to submit to the legislature, to have Ms. Anderson draft a letter of response that would incorporate what we have discussed today, and that it then be submitted to Mr. Deerking and the active president on that day, whoever that is, and for review before it is sent to the legislature.
I'll agree to second the amended motion.
Okay? Any public comment on the amended motion? Any further board discussion on the motion? I'll start roll call vote, starting with Mr. Ma.
Yes?
Mr. DeBrownstein.
Yes.
Dr. Basti Martinez.
Yes.
Ms. Endozo.
Yes.
I'm a yes. Vice President Moreno.
Yes.
Mr. Vertito.
Yes.
Ms. Norton.
Abstain.
Mr. Deerking.
Yes.
Thank you. 8 yes, 1 abstention, motion passes. I believe that concludes this agenda item. Board members have asked for a 10-minute break. Then we'll reconvene, and we will start public comment and disciplinary hearings. Thank you. Hearings, we just have one more agenda item. That's item number 6, public comment on items not on the agenda. During the meeting today, public comment is welcome. Under Bagley-Keene Meeting Act, board may not take any action on issues raised by public that are not on the agenda other than to decide whether to schedule the issue for a future meeting. If any person wishes to address the board, please come forward to the table. And if you wish, you may give your name and the name of the organization you represent so that the board will have a record of those who appear, or you may choose to remain anonymous, as a person wishing to provide general comment is not required to identify himself or herself. Do we have any public comment on items not on the agenda today? Yes, ma'am, please. Come forward to the microphone. If you would like to introduce yourself, you may, or you may remain anonymous.
My name is Claudia Piceno, and I'm here representing SEIU UHW.
Great, welcome.
Thank you. I can start.
Yes,
Okay.
please.
Good morning. My name is Claudia. I'm here on behalf of 90,000 healthcare workers of SEIU, including more than 6,000 licensed vocational nurses and psychiatric technicians. I have been an LVN for 1 month, and I am here today because I am asking the board to examine their pre-licensure requirements for both licensed vocational nurses and psychiatric technicians. When I was in nursing school, I had to work full-time in order to pay for rent, cover the cost of running my vehicle, as well as books, uniforms, and tuition. I vividly remember one Saturday night during my 4th semester, fall of 2015, I was driving home to Escondido, exhausted after clinical hours after an evening shift of 2 to 10 p.m. at Kaiser in San Diego when my tire blew out. I was mentally and physically exhausted. And was attempting to stay positive at every turn of events because I had gotten this far and I didn't want this to affect me in completing the program. I was about 20 miles from home, and all I could remember was thinking, how was I going to get home and what time would that be? How would I get to work the next day? On top of all this, I had to also think about when I was going to complete my clinical paperwork, which was due first thing on Monday morning. My 12-hour shift started at 7 a.m. the next day, Sunday, at Tri-City Medical Center, and that was 15 miles from my home. I was able to get help from a friend that lived near Kaiser. I consider myself fortunate that I was able to get home that night and then to work the next day on my spare tire. I graduated in August 2016, and I successfully passed the NCLEX, and sometimes I wonder how I did it. A handful of my classmates didn't finish the program due to the stresses of juggling jobs, school, and family responsibilities. An LVN or psychiatric technician has to work at least 954 hours to be able to be granted an opportunity to sit down for the licensure exam. This is a barrier that many students are unable to overcome. We ask that the board evaluate their pre-licensure internship requirements and report to the public by a date no later than July 1st, 2019, the source and rationale for the requirements, and if the requirements remain necessary for the protection of the public, and any proposed modifications to these requirements.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank
And
you.
I just want to be clear, thank you for sharing your story. And I want to be clear, you're talking about working hours and then challenging the licensure exam?
No, during the schooling, during
The number of hours required for clinicals?
for clinicals,
is what you're
yes.
saying? Okay, so the clinical hour requirement.
Correct.
Thank you very much for your comments.
Thank you.
We can take that under consideration. I would also direct you to speak with Ms. Cheryl Anderson, who oversees our education consultants. And while I cannot provide the rationale behind the required hours, they definitely can. So before you leave today, please consult with Ms. Anderson, who may be able to provide you with some facts concerning
Okay.
that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam President?
Yes.
So thank you for bringing this forward. I did notice in preparing for the class, for the schools to come before us on Friday, that a lot of the schools are changing their curriculum hours around, so there doesn't seem to be a set number. So, so I think I would be interested in seeing a report related to the reasoning behind and what the parameters are myself, because I did notice a significant jump in a couple of programs, and there was about 4 this time that have major curriculum reviews, so.
Maybe we could put that on the May agenda to discuss the hours required, number of clinical hours required for graduation. I know there is some minimum required. I know that is definitely true. But we could definitely put that on our May agenda and take that up at that time.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
There was just, I think, one school that added like 200 clinical hours.
Yeah.
Like, it was a ridiculous, well, it was a significant amount of hours, so.
Thank you. So yes, I think that would be a good agenda item for May. Do we have any other public comment at this time? Okay, I'm not seeing any. That moves us directly then into agenda item number 7. At this time, I will turn the meeting over to Administrative Law Judge Nye Perkins, and we will reestablish a quorum, and Her Honor will lead the meeting from here on.
Hello? All right. Before we get started with the petition hearings today, I want to make sure that we have an introduction for the court reporter. Before I go on the record, I'm going to go on record here in just a second. I will open the matter first, and then with regard to each of these petitions, I think it's probably useful first, before we do that, to establish a quorum. So if we could have everyone on the board introduce themselves, please. Yes, please.
I'm Todd DeBronstein. I'm a psychiatric technician member of the board.
Bernice Basti Martinez, public member of the board.
Tammy Indozo, LVN member of the board.
Samantha James Perez, Psych Tech member and board president.
Andrew Moreno, Board Vice President and Public Member.
John Vertito, I'm the nursing educator member of the board.
Donna Norton, LVN member.
John Deerking, public member.
Okay, thank you all very much. And with that, we have 5 hearings set, or 5 petition hearings set today. And I'll begin with the first one. So, if, Madam Court Reporter, if you're ready. I will open the record in the matter of the petition for early termination of probation filed by Gretchen McClintock. This bears Office of Administrative Hearings, case number 2017-011-040. Today's date is February 8th, 2017. My name is Deborah Nye Perkins. I am an administrative law judge with the Office of Administrative Hearings for the state of California. And I'm assigned to sit today with the quorum that has just been established for the Board of Vocational Nursing and Psychiatric Technicians. They are convened here today to consider this petition. And may I take appearance of the record, please, for counsel, beginning with the Attorney General's office?
Good morning, Your Honor. Deputy Attorney General Shannon Brubaker, appearing on behalf of the people of the state of California, pursuant to Business and Professions Code 2878.7 and Government Code Section 11522.
Thank you, Ms. Brubaker. Do we have Ms. Gretchen McClintock here? And Ms. McClintock, are you represented by counsel? Yes. Okay. Sir, could you please state your name for the record?
Walter Batt, attorney for Gretchen McClintock.
And how do you spell your last name?
B-A-T-T.
Thank you, Mr. Batt.
Yes.
Okay, before we get started here, I'm going to give some general information as to about how this hearing will proceed, and I note there are probably a number of other petitioners sitting in the audience, so hopefully, if you will pay attention, it's very similar for each of the petitions. Given that the burden of proof is on the petitioner here to establish that they are entitled to the relief that they are seeking, in this case, early termination of probation. In some other cases we may hear today, it will be for reinstatement of licensure. Typically, though the burden of proof is on her, I'm going to allow the Attorney General generally to present their case first, generally in the form of documents. You'll have the opportunity to object to any of those documents and generally give a summary of the case. At that point, it'll be the petitioner's opportunity to present their case. Obviously, we have a number of petitions in a short time period here, so we try to be very, very efficient on time. And then after we have the back and forth, the board will have an opportunity to ask questions. I may ask questions as well. So with that, Ms. Brubaker, do you happen to have documents that you would like me to mark?
I do, Your Honor. May I approach?
Yes, please. Thank you. Mr. Batt, I'm assuming you've received copies of these documents, correct?
Yes, I have.
Okay. All right, I'm going to mark these for the record so that we can go forward. I note, unfortunately, you have these marked as A, B, C, and D. Typically, I mark, we do at our office mark the Deputy Attorney General's exhibits as 1, 2, 3, 4, so I'm going to mark it as 1, 2, 3, 4.
Your Honor, could I request that the entire packet be marked as Exhibit 1? It was served with these section letters.
Oh, I see, so everything was served as one section, so we have, yeah, unfortunately,
We have sections A through J, and that was how the petition.
I have a loose paper.
And there is one extra page that seemed to have been missing when the copies were made in the original petition packet, and so I brought in that page. It goes between B5 and B6.
Okay, I know that in these hearings, it's efficient to mark them as 1, 2, 3, 4. For time purposes, of course, that doesn't deal with admission, with other objections that we may have with any specific document, which can be problematic. Mr. Batt, you've reviewed these documents, I take it?
I have, except for B6.
It's the back of petitioner's petition for reinstatement. It was inadvertently not copied when the petition packet was put together, and so I noticed that and obtained an extra copy of that page.
All right. Yes, I have reviewed the packet.
Okay, I don't know if you anticipate, or if you have any objections, or will have any objections. I know I haven't marked them yet, so like I said, typically I mark 1, 2, 3, 4. Each one of them is considered separately with regard to evidentiary rulings, but given that this is a petition hearing in front of the board for time limitations, would you anticipate any objections to the documents?
No, I do not.
Okay, in that case, I'm going to mark the entire packet as Exhibit 1, and each document within is 1A, 1B, 1C, and so on and so forth. It looks like we go to Exhibit 1J. Am I correct on that, Ms. Brubaker?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. Okay, so I'll mark the entire packet as Exhibit 1. Mr. Batt, I understand you indicated that you may have your own documents for consideration. Do you have any documents other than those that are in this binder that you would like for consideration?
Yes, I do, Your Honor. These are letters of recommendations with the commensurate number of copies that were requested.
Okay. Could you bring those forward, please?
Yes, may I approach?
Yes. Thank you. And I'm assuming each manila folder is a set of letters, am I correct?
Yes.
Okay. And have you provided a copy for Ms. Brubaker? Or did you hand that to me?
There's 15 copies.
Yes, there's extra copies.
Okay, Ms. Brubaker, here, there's a couple of extra copies.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're good. Okay, I'm going to mark each one of these separately because it's a little bit too complicated. So,
All right.
So the first document that I have, that I'm going to mark as Exhibit A, appears at the top. It states Personal Care Assistance Performance Evaluation. I'm going to mark that document as Exhibit A. The next document I have is a letter dated January 16th, 2017 from Sandy Sandrick. I'm going to mark that as Exhibit B. The next document I have is a letter from Joni Bletcher. I'll mark that as Exhibit C. The next document I have is a letter dated January 27th, 2007 from Timothy Peltison. I'll mark that as Exhibit D. The next document I have is a handwritten letter dated January 12th, 2017. I'll mark that as Exhibit E. It appears to be from Jill Redding. Next document I have is dated February 6th, 2017 from Reginald Stephen Tixay. I'll mark that next in order as Exhibit F. Next document I have is a letter dated January 30th, 2017 from Ed Poole. I'll mark that next in order as Exhibit G. Next document I have is a letter dated 2/6/17. I'll mark that as Exhibit H. Next document I have is a letter dated 1/21/2017. I'll mark that as Exhibit I. Next document I have is a letter dated January 30th, 2017. And I will mark that as Exhibit J. Next document I have is dated 2/7/17 from Heidi Bremer. I'll mark that as next in line, Exhibit K. Next document I have is a letter dated January 18th, 2017 from Michael and Nancy Edgar. I'll mark that next in line as Exhibit L. Any further documents, Mr. Batt?
No, Your Honor. I just note for the record that all but one are under penalty of perjury as required.
Okay. Okay, Ms. Brubaker, would you like to provide an opening statement or your position statement?
Yes, Your Honor. First, I'd just like to identify the documents that were marked as Exhibit 1. 1A is Petitioner Probation Report dated December 22nd, 2016. 1B is the original petition for early termination of probation dated June 13th, 2016, with the following attachments: certificate of completion from Homestead Schools for courses in substance abuse and nurses legal advisor completed in March and April 2015, and a letter from the board to petitioner dated May 31st, 2016. 1C is certification of petitioner's vocational nurse license. 1D is notice of hearing and related correspondence. 1E is an October 1st, 2015 report from Pharmatech Laboratories containing the results of a urine test conducted on September 25th, 2015. 1F are quarterly reports received from petitioner dated July 2nd, 2014 through October 5th, 2016. 1G is attendance verification forms for weekly support group meetings dated January 4th, 2014 through October 3rd, 2016. 1H is certificate of completion from Homestead Schools. It appears to be a better copy of the earlier one I mentioned. 1I is correspondence between petitioner and enforcement program analyst Ebony Newton, as well as correspondence between Ms. Newton and Kathleen Egan at Pharmatech regarding the lab results. And court documents for Orange County Superior Court case number 12HM05414 related to the dismissal of the case pursuant to Penal Code 1203.4. And 1J is the board's decision in case number VN 2012-1901, dated March 13th, 2014, and effective April 12th, 2014. And the statement of issues in that case, which was filed September 4th, 2013, is Exhibit A to the decision. At this time, Your Honor, I'd like to offer Exhibit 1 into evidence for jurisdictional purposes.
And there's no objections, I'm assuming?
No objection.
Okay. I'm assuming you want to offer them for more than jurisdictional purposes, correct? Given that some of those documents you're going to be relying on, other than just to explain why we're here today.
Yes, Your Honor.
Any objections to that?
No objection.
Okay. Exhibit 1A through J is admitted.
Thank you, Your Honor. We are here on a petition for early termination of probation. Petitioner applied for a vocational nurse license in August 2012. In May 2013, her application was denied and a statement of issues was filed on September 4th, 2013. Petitioner entered a stipulated settlement which was adopted by the board on March 13th, 2014. Pursuant to the stipulated settlement and decision, petitioner was issued registered nursing license number 280710 on April 21st, 2014. The license was immediately revoked with the revocation stayed and petitioner placed on 4 years probation. The basis for discipline in this matter was petitioner's July 30th, 2012 criminal conviction. Petitioner pled guilty to violation of Vehicle Code Section 23152, Subdivision B, driving with a BAC of 0.08% or more, which is a misdemeanor. The court further found that petitioner's BAC was 0.20% or more within the meaning of Vehicle Code Section 23538, Subdivision B2. An additional count of driving under the influence of alcohol was dismissed pursuant to a plea agreement. The circumstances were as follows. On the evening of February 3rd, 2012, a patrol officer with Newport Beach Police Department responded to a call that a female driver was observed driving erratically on 3 wheels and speeding. Upon arrival, the patrol officer observed that petitioner's vehicle was missing the driver's side rear wheel and tire. The lower half of the driver's side rear axle was gone and the axle was touching the ground. The officer observed that petitioner exhibited signs of alcohol intoxication and petitioner admitted to consuming alcohol earlier in the evening. During booking, petitioner provided a blood sample which was analyzed with a BAC of 0.36%. On or about July 12, 2012, petitioner was sentenced to 1 day in jail with a credit for 1 day and granted 3 years informal probation. Petitioner was further ordered to complete 49 hours of community service in lieu of fines, complete a 9-month Level 2 first offender alcohol program, and comply with probation terms. Petitioner's discipline by the board was also based on a false statement made in her August 5th, 2012 application for a vocational nurse license. In response to the question, have you ever been convicted of any offense, including traffic violations, petitioner answered no, failing to disclose her July 30th, 2012 conviction. Pursuant to the stipulated settlement and decision, petitioner's probationary period commenced April 21st, 2014, and is scheduled to end April 20th, 2018. She's in compliance with the terms of her probation, with the exception of a positive test for ethanol on September 25th, 2015. And I did want to point out that in the probation summary, which is 1A, Term 2, that says compliance with probation program, non-compliance. The psychotherapy requirement, that's not correct.
Okay. Okay, just let me step back for just 1 second. You said that she's scheduled to end her probation April 2018?
Yes, Your Honor.
And
April 20th, 2018.
Okay, and then she said she had a positive alcohol test in when exactly?
September 25th, 2015.
And then the next thing you said was with regard to her probation program, which document specifically are you referring
It's
to?
1A, the probation summary.
Okay, and which term exactly are you referring to?
Term 2.
So,
It incorrectly states that she's not in compliance because of a psychotherapy requirement, but there was no psychotherapy requirement for petitioner. At this point, it is petitioner's burden to demonstrate that she is rehabilitated and safe to practice and that she should be granted early termination of probation. Therefore, we have nothing further at this time but reserve the right to cross-examine petitioner. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Brubaker. Okay, Mr. Batt, I'm assuming that Ms. McClintock is your only witness today, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, Ms. McClintock, before you testify, I'm going to place you under oath, okay? Could you please raise your right hand for me? Do you swear under the penalty of perjury to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in this hearing today?
I do.
Okay, and I'm going to ask you, I know I have it, but I'm going to ask you to state and spell your full name for me.
Gretchen McClintock, GretchenMcClintock.
Thank you, Mr. Batt.
Thank you, members of the board, Administrative Law Judge, Deputy Attorney General. Thank you for your time today. Ms. McClintock is here, as stated, for an early termination of her probation. I'd like to begin with a statement from Ms. McClintock to the board, and I'll follow up with a statement myself, and that will be the sum of what we have to say, keeping in mind the scope of our presentation today. I know that was a sensitive subject earlier today, so.
Good morning, board members, Judge. I'm Gretchen McClintock. I want to start off by thanking you all for your time today to allow me to tell my story. When I got a DUI back in 2012, I realized I made a huge mistake, and I took it very seriously. I have been 100% sober since then. I know there was the dirty test, which I'm actually going to let my attorney address, but there was a mistake, or there was cold medicine, or there was something that caused the positive, because I have not drinking since the night that I got my DUI, and that I swear on oath that I have not. The first thing I do when I wake up every day is to log on to the Famatech application on my phone, which tells me if I need to test that day. I have never missed a test in almost 3 years. I'm a single mother and sole provider for my daughter Hannah, who relies on me as her mother and father. I attended nursing school to better our lives. I was under a great deal of stress and a lot of financial pressure, and I made a terrible decision. I now know better ways to deal with my stress, and I'm taking care of myself in positive ways through my AA meetings, fitness, meditation, and my Christian faith. After I got my DUI, I faced my punishment as an opportunity to make myself better. I learned to live a healthy life and be responsible in my community. I know my actions affect myself, my daughter, my community, and my faith. I know they are all interconnected as they start with me. After I graduated from nursing school and passed the NCLEX, I was granted my license. However, it was suspended right away. I realized quite quickly that it felt like an insurmountable task to find a job with the conditions and restrictions placed on my license. I knew I had to find a means of making a living for myself and for my daughter immediately. I started working for Suzanne Peltison as her personal assistant. I helped Suzanne with activities of daily living, such as preparing meals, shopping, errands, companionship, and household maintenance. Unfortunately, I'm not authorized to help her with anything medical. I work with a woman named Sandy Sandrick, who is an LVN and also the care manager for Mrs. Peltison. She knows of my probation, as does the entire Peltison family, and together Sandy and I provide support for Mrs. Peltison. I've learned 3 valuable things from all of this. I've realized the importance of being responsible, number 1. Number 2, always being the best I can be, even though I'm not able to provide medical services, nursing services. And most importantly, number 3, I will never take for granted the privilege the state of California has given me, based on my education, to be granted the honor of an LVN license. I will always hold that in the highest regard in every action I take. I deeply regret the mistake I made, and I treasure my sobriety in my life. I want the board to know that I take full responsibility for my actions, and I apologize to each of you as representatives for the people of the state of California. I vow to never let myself, my daughter, or the board down ever again. So today, I respectfully ask for a modification of my probation and early termination. I have complied with all the terms of my probation, dismissal of my DUI from my record, and an earnest effort at rehabilitation, which I hope is evident through my weekly AA meetings and my 11 letters of personal support signed under penalty of perjury as required. Thank you very much for your time.
Mr. Batt, you said you would like to add something before I allow cross-examination, if at all possible. Do you? Okay. Ms. Brubaker, cross-examination.
Thank you, Ms. McClintock. Have you had any criminal convictions other than the July 30th, 2012 conviction?
I have not.
Are there any criminal charges pending against you at this time?
No.
Why didn't you disclose the July 30th, 2012 conviction on your application for a vocational nurse license?
To be honest with you, there had been so much time between, when it happened and when she asked me. I was in the woman's office, and she asked me to, honestly, it just skipped my mind. And the minute that I got home, I called her and I said, oh my gosh, I forgot to tell you about the DUI. So I waited 1 week and got a bunch of paperwork together, and then I sent it in immediately, letting the board know that I had just, I know that sounds silly, but that's what happened. I just didn't think of it when she asked me that question, but I did comply with and let the board know immediately, a week later, just when I had paperwork together.
Okay, because I think the conviction was July 30th and your application was August 5th, I believe, so only a week had passed, right?
Well, I got the DUI in February. So I'm just saying, when she told me, obviously I knew it was going to be found in my background checks. So I wasn't trying to hide it. It was just like a spur of the moment. And I even called her and said, could you not mail that? And she said, I already FedExed it. So, it was, I don't know why I didn't think of it at the time.
What efforts have you made to find a job as a licensed vocational nurse?
Before I started working for Mrs. Peltison, I realized I wasn't able to work for any home health care, any hospice, any registries. So I did apply to a couple of assisted livings and a hospital, and I didn't get the job, and I needed to find work. So I took the job with Mrs. Peltison, which I am still there now. And I haven't been looking for another job since I've been with her, because I really enjoy my job, and she's amazing and really needs me. So I haven't currently been looking for other jobs as a LVN.
I have nothing further.
Okay. Before we go and I allow the board to ask some questions, I'm going to ask you a few questions about the documents that you gave me.
Sure.
Can you take a look at Exhibit A? That's the Personal Care Assistant Performance Evaluation. Can you tell me what that is?
That's from Sandy Sandrick, who is my she's my supervisor. So she's an LVN who gave me job performance.
That's for your work with, I'm sorry, you're saying was Ms. Peltison?
Peltison.
Peltison.
Right.
So these are your job performance evaluations?
Yes.
For what time period?
Currently, and I've been employed there since May of 2013, I believe, or 2014.
So from May 2014 till now?
Well, she just gave me one because I didn't know I would have to have that, but that's just a current one.
Okay, and then each one, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 or so letters of recommendation from various people, correct?
I thought there was 11. but-
There may be 11, let me count again.
Okay.
1, 2, 3, 4. 10, 11, correct. I
Okay.
have 11 different letters.
Okay.
Did each of those individuals know about your conviction at the time that they drafted the letter?
Yes, absolutely.
And I assume, Mr. Badd, you'd like to admit those documents as administrative hearsay, of course?
Yes.
Any objections, Ms. Brubaker?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. Exhibits A through
L.
L, thank you.
Yes.
Are admitted as administrative hearsay. Do any of the board members have questions? Anyone on this side? Anyone have any questions? Okay, we have one.
None.
Oh, wait, none? Okay, we have one question down here.
Ms. McClintock, you state that all 11 people who wrote, excuse me. Sorry, didn't have my mic on. Ms. McClintock, you state that all 11 people were aware of your conviction.
Yes, sir.
Why didn't they address it in the letter?
Some people talked about me being on probation in the letter.
But it could be for various other reasons, but did they know why you were placed on probation, is what I'm asking.
Absolutely, yes.
So again, it goes back to why didn't they place that knowledge in the letter, acknowledging that you've been where you are now as a comparison.
Right.
So I'm just kind of curious because.
You know what, I guess they weren't sure what to write. When I said a character reference letter, I just asked them to, tell what they thought of me as a person, as an employee, because some letters are from my employer's children. There's a couple letters from her children. So I guess we didn't know the requirements on the character reference, so that would be why.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Any further questions? Thank you.
I do.
I'm going to ask, I think it's Ms. Norton. Go ahead.
Good morning.
Good morning.
You said that you're not currently looking for an LVN job.
Correct.
Because you like the job that you're in.
Right.
So why is it then that you're asking for early termination of your probation?
Well, she is almost 92, so I don't know how long I'll have her, but I have let her and her family know that I would stay with them until she passes. I used to work for her and her husband. He died of Parkinson's almost 2 years ago. I just feel like they've been so great to me and they really rely on me, so I don't want to leave them. I mean, possibly get a job on the weekends working as an LVN, but it's really just because I feel like I want to be there for the family and not leave them. We're all attached to each other, so I feel like that would be, I don't know, I wouldn't want to do that to them or myself. I'm very attached to her as well.
Okay. And then one more question.
Sure.
You had only one DUI,
That's right.
and you received 4 years of probation.
That's correct.
Okay, I have no more questions.
Okay, question?
Yes. It's similar to what Ms. Norton was asking you. When you entered into the stipulated settlement, you knew one of the requirements was to work as a VN.
Right.
As a VN. And the reason that is so that the board can monitor your work as a VN to determine if you're safe to practice on an unrestricted license. So do you want to work as a VN?
I do, absolutely.
Because, yeah, it also concerned me when you said, I'm not looking for a job right now.
Right.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying that's just because you feel dedication to this family?
Correct.
Okay. And afterwards, do you want to re-pursue your VN career?
Yes, I do. Absolutely.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, question down here?
Yes. I just want to make sure I heard you correctly. One, just a follow-up on your work and your intent to work as an LVN. If we understand, you have not done that work at all since you were put on probation.
That's correct.
And in your current environment, you are not utilizing those skills.
Right, I wasn't allowed to get a job, basically at someone's home, doing anything nursing.
Given the time lapse, and if I heard it correctly, you're not currently looking for a position.
Correct.
How could you help this board understand that you would be able to handle all the duties and responsibilities associated with this license if you were placed in a position at the time you leave where you are currently employed?
There'd have to be some retraining. I'm guessing, at the job that I would receive. And I would just do whatever it took to, re-remember what I learned or retrain, maybe even go back to my college to see if they could, help brush me up on some things that I had done within the clinicals.
Okay. And then my original question was about the false positive.
Right.
Did I hear you correctly? Your attorney's going to address that, or can you talk to us a bit about that false positive?
Oh, sure. I literally have no idea because I think that I got a letter in March, I think it was March, saying that I had a positive test back in September. So I was like, well, I don't know. I mean, it was 6 months or something prior to. So I did call Famatech and asked what could cause that result. I was told cold medicine, mouthwash, various foods. So I addressed it with Ebony Newton, my division enforcement agent. And I wrote her a letter saying, it must have been mouthwash. I think I was smoking at the time, so I was using a lot of mouthwash, or maybe it was cold medicine. I have no idea what it was, but I certainly wouldn't have gone to test if I had been drinking. So I don't know why it happened.
In your documents, you also referenced some type of candy or substitute?
Well, there's a certain candy that I like that I looked on the back and it said sugar alcohols or mannitol or something, so I didn't know if that could cause the reading. I don't think it could because I was discussing with my attorney and he said there was a negative glucose on the test, which I guess it would have been positive if it was from a sugar alcohol. I was just trying to come up with what could have caused, I was in shock when I got that.
And then the
document.
last follow-up, in your correspondence, there was a statement from you that if there was that positive at that time, that there might be another one because of the candy or whatever.
Well, I guess I was saying if the candy had caused it, I'm still consuming the candy. So, I didn't see why there wouldn't be another positive test if that's what it was caused by. But I wasn't likely saying there would be another positive because I literally haven't taken a drink of alcohol since the night I got my DUI, and I swear on my daughter's life. I mean, I take it very seriously. I believe getting the DUI saved my life because I am a recovering alcoholic and it runs in my family, and I don't drink and I won't ever because I could have died or killed someone else, and that's very scary to me. Awful.
Thank you.
Okay, any further questions? Okay.
Thank you, Your Honor. Just one last question for me in regards to your petition. When you accepted the probation, you wrote that you would accept all tenets of the probation, is that correct?
Accepted what?
All components of the probation. There are approximately 20 individual items that you would have to agree to perform or comply with. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. One of them is work in the field.
Right.
And now you're asking to terminate probation early, and you're not looking for a job. Do you see? One of them is you have to work a minimum of 20 hours a week for 6 months.
Right.
And you're clearly not in compliance with the terms of probation. And now you're asking us to early terminate the probation when you're not in compliance. And you're not making any effort to be in compliance. Now, I understand the devotion you have to your patient, but at any time, have you made the attempt? If so, how many times or how many places have you made the attempt to be in compliance with that one aspect of your probation?
I did in the very beginning, and I found it virtually impossible to get a job with the restrictions and the probation. I don't know how other people find jobs or where they're working, but that's my reasoning for asking for early termination. So when my patient, does die, I'm able to find a job in nursing. I understand what you're saying, I do, but I guess I don't understand how people find jobs with those restrictions.
But they do.
Okay,
But they do.
okay.
And so that's why the conflict I have is that you want early probation, and by all accounts, you look like a good candidate for it, but then you're flagrantly not in compliance with it because it's not that you just couldn't get a job, but you're not continuously making the effort.
Right.
So that's,
Right.
that's the conflict I need to have you address. And, thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
When is the last time that you actually did work as an LVN?
I haven't worked as an LVN.
Ever?
No.
Since you graduated from school?
Right.
Okay, thank you.
One more question down here.
I have a couple questions, if I
Oh,
may. Your Honor.
we have one
I'm
down here,
sorry.
and then we'll go to you, okay?
Okay. One of the conditions of probation is the not working for a registry, private duty positions, those temporary placement, just looking out for everyone's safety. But it sounded like you had said that you were open to retraining. So if the condition that you did get some retraining and you were at a level where you felt comfortable working for a registry, would you be open to that?
Absolutely.
And how would you classify your current employer? Do they fit into one of these categories?
My attorney will address that. I'm not sure what.
Okay. Based on your work experience with your current employer, what do you think the likelihood is that they would pick you up as an LVN?
I mean, I think if I was able to be hired as that, they would hire me as that. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Okay.
And is your current employer considered a nurse registry, or is it, yeah,
You know, I
do they
don't,
place caregivers with people that need care? Okay.
I'm sorry, I'm a little confused. Okay, thank you.
Okay, we had a couple questions down here.
Yes, Ms. McClintock, what's your actual sobriety date?
It's February 14, 2012.
And you indicated you go to weekly AA meetings?
Yes,
And do you have a sponsor currently?
I don't have a sponsor.
So in addition to AA, the program, how do you maintain your sobriety then?
I treasure it, I value it, I remember, you know, what happened in the past. I look at my daughter every day. I want to be a good example for her. I take my job, my life, my sobriety very seriously. I have no desire to drink. The AA meetings, surrounding myself, I don't have a lot of friends that drink, and I don't surround myself with people that drink. You know, I mean, I am in social settings at times where people are drinking, but I don't go to places that have a, you know, I don't go to bars and things like that where there is a lot of alcohol because I don't really feel comfortable. Not because I'm worried of my actions, it's just not who I tend to surround myself with. I prefer to be with people, you know, that don't drink also. It's just something that I hold in the highest standards. I just don't ever want to drink again. It just, you know, could ruin my life or someone else's, and I'm not going to do that.
Well, the reason I asked the question is, given the history that you articulated, how do you make sure that you have an appropriate safety net so as to continue your abstinence?
Well, everyone that knows me knows I don't drink, and they know, you know, how important it is to me, I guess. So if I ever were to drink, I'm sure there would be people trying to stop me because everyone knows how important it is and that I don't drink. I mean, I'm the designated driver most of the time. It's just common knowledge of anyone that knows me at all knows that I'm sober. So a lot of friends and family support, I guess.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Okay.
Your Honor, sorry. I'm trying to let my other colleagues have. In the evaluation by your monitor, it says you're not in compliance with psychotherapy.
We just addressed that earlier.
I apologize. Thank you.
Okay, any further questions?
I have just one thing.
Okay.
Whoever knows, perhaps the DAG, when a candidate, a probationer, submits to sampling, biological fluid sampling. Is that a quantitative test or qualitative? Does it test for the presence, or does it tell us how much of the ethanol is present, or
Well,
the substance?
it said how much of the ethanol was present in the urine. I believe it was 0.65 milligrams per deciliter, and the acceptable amount was 0.20.
Okay, and that
I
number
remember
really
correctly.
doesn't,
Okay. If there are no further questions for Ms. McClintock, Mr. Batt, I'm assuming you would like to address that question. I don't know if you want to address it now or if you want to do it in your closing statement. How would you like to proceed?
I'll address it.
Okay.
Actually, I'll address each of the questions first before I go through my presentation. Sir, it's a quantitative test. And if you go to the actual report, which I could direct you to
E1.
E1, number 2.
yes.
Under the explanation, it says it's not, it only verifies the quantity of ethanol. And to that extent, there are a number of things in the research that cause ethanol within the blood system, which I'll address, but that's the kind of test that it is. Madam President, in terms of your question about working as an LVN, Ms. McClintock was granted her license, which was revoked immediately. So with the conditions, that day, the next breath. So there was no way to work as an LVN except with the conditions that she had, which she's addressed, which she did try to get a job and ended up, in the interest of full disclosure, I am Ms. Peltison's nephew. And so I have firsthand knowledge of Ms. McClintock and the value to our family that she provides to my aunt, who lives alone if it weren't for Ms. McClintock. So I can address that in my statement. I think, Mr. Dobronski, I just answered your question as to what kind of environment it is. So it is a home care environment without on-site supervision. Therefore, Ms. McClintock was not allowed under her terms of her probation to provide LVN services. And to that extent, in my closing, I'll address perhaps a solution for you in terms of modifying the probation to allow what Ms. McClintock would like and what the board may want in terms of supervised services as an LVN.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Sure.
Is it appropriate
That's
to
fine.
do now? Okay. Do you have, other than a professional relationship with Sandy Sendrick, the person who completed
Right.
this evaluation?
I mean, she's my supervisor and she's the LVN, but no, I mean.
No, you don't? Do you?
I'm gay. I don't date women,
Is
so I
she
have no relationship with her.
Familiarity,
Never
family,
met her.
cousin?
No, she's not a family member.
Never met her.
Never, okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Batt, anything further?
Yeah, yes. I think I addressed all of the questions. In terms of the situation with Ms. McClintock, I want to address that answer that she provided on the application about the criminal conviction. And she gave you her honest answer, what she thought it was. I can give you my professional opinion on that as a former DA. And in fact, I was a DUI prosecutor, so I've heard it all. And in court, I heard everything. I've heard statements that are beyond any sort of belief. But what I have heard is a statement that is similar, because under Penal Code 1403, what the judge tells the defendant is if they adhere to all terms of their probation, that they'll allow withdrawal of the plea and they'll dismiss the case, and there will be no record of a conviction. And I've had defendants come into court and say, I've not ever been convicted, when in fact it's expressly stated that they must disclose that on any licensure or other state or federal application. So I've heard that before. Ms. McClintock certainly heard that statement in court. So I don't know why she did it, but it has occurred before in my professional work as a DA. I would tell you, in terms of all the letters of recommendation, of course, some of them are my relatives. I did not speak with any of them about these letters of recommendation. And in fact, what I told Ms. McClintock is do not tell them what to write, because I don't want letters that are dictated or written and signed by someone, because I know them as fast as I can see black and white. So that's not the kind of letters that you want. So, Mr. Vertido, I think that that is probably why you don't see probation in those letters, because they chose not to put it in there. But no one told them what to write. So I think that addresses those issues. In terms of the violations in Section E, each of them, term 15, 17, 18, and 20, all have a genesis in the dirty test that came back on September 25th, 2015. They are individual terms of probation, but they all derive from that dirty test. So there is really that one issue that has caused all four of those to occur. In looking at the causation of what makes ethanol appear in the blood, there are studies that are clear. And in fact, many defense attorneys have come into court when I was there, and they present those. And under what's called a Frye analysis, which is a test where, in fact, the court does validly look at this, many times there are errors in the testing in the facilities. It is not unheard of, and quite frankly, it's very probable that this is one of many that occurs. There are things like mouthwash, perfume that can be absorbed through the body, cologne, body sprays, over-the-counter cough and cold medication, allergy medication, balsamic vinegar, and vanilla extract. And it's not the sugar that is the issue. In fact, in vanilla extract, there's 1.6 grams of sugar in a 31-gram serving, so it's not going to cause the problem. It's something else where there was excessive amount of introduction or contact, if in fact there was a qualitative verification from the quantitative test. So I would tell you, out of 77 tests that Ms. McClintock took, only this one is at issue. And during that time, she expended $9,248 and her livelihood, knowing that she could not, that's the cost of the test, $9,248. Her livelihood and her job, all for this one test. Using my common sense in this case, I would ask the board to give consideration of the fact that this in fact could have been caused by something other than consumption of alcohol. Obviously, the board's looking under Business and Professions Code of 2522. This is a rehabilitation question. And I know the Deputy Attorney General, Administrative Law Judge, these are the things that you want to know. And when you look at the list of what it is Ms. McClintock is really being asked to do, she basically has addressed all of those issues on the list, and under BPC 27601A, she is eligible for early termination. She has met that requirement. So I would ask the board to look at those things and weigh them out in terms of what this means to Ms. McClintock. You have the court documents that include the dismissal. You have the letters from Ms. McClintock. You have the letters of reference from her nurse supervisor. You have the letter from the client, which is Ms. Peltison, my aunt. You have the AA proof of sobriety and attendance, 1 week, each week during the term of the probation to date as she sits here today. Number 6 is not applicable today in terms of the rehabilitation requirements. Number 7 is the letters from knowledgeable professionals, which you have. Number 8 is the certificate of rehabilitation, which you do not have, but you do have the certificate of compliance for the courses that were required, which is in the AG's packet. Number 9, you have compliance on these tests except for the one, and number 10 is not applicable. So in fact, what you have here is someone who wants to practice, wants to be an LVN, and in fact, my family would love for her to be an LVN in my aunt's home. So I would say to the board, I'm asking for an early termination of the probation. If, because of the issues that you see today, You do not feel that that is within the ambit of the board and allowing the safe practice of nursing, then I would ask alternatively that perhaps a modification be allowed. And that modification I would propose would be to allow Ms. McClintock to provide those services as an LVN, subject to a retraining program in a home care environment. I can attest to you, now I'm not talking as an attorney, I can attest to you as a nephew of my aunt, who's the last remaining person. My mother, my father, my uncle are gone. She is dear to my family. And we could not survive without Ms. McClintock. She is so trustworthy, never late, always there for my aunt. And in fact, at Christmas, we weren't able to be with my aunt, none of the family. So Ms. McClintock took my aunt home and had Christmas with her. And I want you to know that, because I'm not trying to pull at heartstrings here. I'm really trying to tell you this is the kind of person that sits before you today. And she would be an asset to the people of the state of California to allow her, with those modifications, to practice as an LVN with some retraining. Thank you for your time.
Ms. Brubaker?
I have nothing further, Your Honor.
Okay. If there's, we have another question from the board?
Actually, I guess it's for the nephew of the client.
Yes.
Does your aunt require LVN care, or does your aunt just require in-home care?
I don't have a complete grasp of the tasks that LVNs do, but she does need monitoring of her medication. She needs her vitals monitored extensively. She has momentary disorientation that requires medical care, where she forgets where she's at. And right now, the LVN has to be called to come to the house. And we would love for Ms. McClintock, to be able to do those things that fall under the LVN providing of care.
So does the LVN that comes to your house, is that a singular LVN that's been hired?
Yes.
Okay. And is there a physician that is overseeing this LVN that comes to your home, so that there are orders and stuff in place?
Yes.
Okay. I had one more follow-up question, if I can remember what it was. So would you be willing, so there's a couple issues that I have, and I'll just be clear with what they are. One is that despite, and it appears that you're a wonderful human being, because even your attorney is choked up over your behavior, but the fact still remains that from the time that you graduated from nursing school, you have not worked as an LVN. So that is concerning. I mean, it's only natural for us to be concerned about that. And while I can certainly understand and appreciate that there are dirty tests out there, and there are tests that come back positive and they're not really positive, but that fact still does remain.
Right.
So in lieu of a early termination of your probation, I'm assuming you would be willing to a modification such as he said, that if possible, to allow you to work in an environment that you could then seek a job, or have working as an LVN in your current job.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. If there's nothing further from either side, correct?
Correct, Your Honor.
Okay. No further questions. With that, the matter is submitted and the record is closed. If you'd like to wait for a second, we'll get a copy of the court reporter's form so you can get a copy of the transcript if necessary.
Thank you for your time today. Thank you.
Okay, and we'll
you
take,
very much.
Lunch break.
how much of a break do we want to take here?
I think we could get that done in half an hour.
So a lunch break until 1 o'clock?
Sounds good.
Okay, lunch break until 1 o'clock. Thank you, sir.
Okay, with you, Josh.